Ethan Cole had exactly 3 seconds to decide if he would die tonight. The black SUV's engine roared. The girl's scream cut through the winter air like shattered glass. His son stood 5 feet away, clutching a backpack decorated with cartoon dinosaurs. In that frozen moment, every instinct screamed at Ethan to protect Noah, to turn away, to pretend he hadn't seen the man's hand clamped over the teenager's mouth as he dragged her toward the vehicle's open door. But Ethan's feet were already moving, his body making a choice his mind hadn't fully processed. He pushed his 6-year-old son toward the grocery store entrance and ran straight into the kind of violence that lives in nightmares. Before we dive into this incredible true story of courage, sacrifice, and the family that formed from a single moment of bravery, please hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The afternoon had started like every Thursday for the past 6 months. Predictable, exhausting, and carefully structured around the fragile routine that kept Ethan Cole's life from falling apart completely. He'd picked Noah up from Riverside Elementary at 3:15, exactly on time because being late meant anxious calls from the school office and the sick feeling of letting his son down. Again. They'd driven across town to Miss Patricia's art studio, where Noah spent an hour covering himself in paint while creating what he proudly called abstract masterpieces that looked suspiciously like dinosaurs eating pizza. Ethan had sat in the waiting area, laptop balanced on his knees, responding to work emails and pretending he wasn't watching the clock with the intensity of a man defusing a bomb. Single parenthood was like that, a constant awareness of time slipping away, of tasks left undone, of the impossible balance between being present and keeping the lights on. By 5:40, they were finally done. Noah emerged from the studio with paint on his nose, his jacket, and somehow, mysteriously, the back of his neck. His gap-toothed grin was so pure, so unself-consciously joyful that Ethan felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the mixture of fierce love and bone-deep fear that had become his constant companion since Sarah died. "Dad, look!" Noah held up a painting that appeared to feature a green creature with too many legs. "It's a T-Rex fighting an octopus in space." "That's incredible, buddy." Ethan ruffled his son's hair, carefully avoiding the still wet paint. "But that T-Rex looks suspiciously like it has 8 arms." "It's a space T-Rex, Dad. They're different." Noah's logic was, as always, unassailable. They climbed into Ethan's aging Honda Civic, 8 years old, needed new tires, but paid off and reliable enough. The grocery store was just across the parking lot, a massive Kroger that stayed open until midnight and had become their Thursday night tradition. Shopping with a 6-year-old was an adventure in negotiation and distraction, but it beat adding another errand to tomorrow's impossible schedule. The parking lot was half empty in the winter dusk, that strange in-between time when the after-work rush had ended and the evening shoppers hadn't yet arrived. Overhead lights flickered on in sections, casting long shadows across the asphalt. The temperature had dropped with the sun, and Ethan's breath formed small clouds in the air as they walked hand in hand toward the store entrance. "Can we get the cereal with the marshmallows?" Noah asked, his standard opening gambit in their weekly shopping negotiations. "We'll see," Ethan replied, the universal parent phrase that meant, "Probably not, but I don't want to start this argument yet." "That means no." Noah sighed with the world weariness of someone who'd heard those words many times before. "That means we'll look at options." Ethan squeezed his son's hand gently. "Maybe we can find something with less sugar and more." The scream cut him off mid-sentence. It wasn't loud. That was what made it so chilling. It was the sound of someone whose voice had been partially muffled, a desperate, strangled cry that spoke of hands clamped over mouths, and the kind of panic that turned your muscles to water. The sound came from somewhere to their left, deeper in the parking lot, away from the store's bright entrance. Ethan's first instinct was to look down at Noah, to make sure his son was safe, unharmed, still connected to his hand. Noah's eyes had gone wide, his dinosaur backpack suddenly forgotten as he turned toward the sound. "Dad, what was—" "Stay close to me." Ethan's voice came out harder than he intended, edged with something sharp. His eyes scanned the parking lot, trying to locate the source of the sound in the growing darkness. And then he saw them. About 40 yards away, Near a black Chevrolet Suburban with tinted windows, a man was dragging a teenage girl toward the vehicle's rear door. Even from this distance, Ethan could see the struggle. The girl's feet scrabbling against the asphalt, her hands clawing at the man's arms, her head whipping back and forth as she tried to break free from his grip. The man was large, wearing a dark jacket and baseball cap pulled low, and he moved with the kind of determined violence that said this wasn't his first time. The girl's bag had fallen to the ground. One of her shoes was missing. And as Ethan watched, frozen for a heartbeat that felt like eternity, the man wrenched open the SUV's door and started forcing her inside. Time did something strange then. It didn't slow down exactly. Ethan would remember every detail with crystal clarity later, but in the moment, everything seemed to happen in rapid, disconnected flashes. His brain cataloged the scene with mechanical precision even as his body began to move. The parking lot was nearly empty. No one else was close enough to see. The girl was fighting, but she was losing. The man was going to get her into that vehicle, and once that door closed, she would vanish into the kind of nightmare that parents whispered about and tried not to imagine. Ethan looked down at Noah. His son's face had gone pale, his small hand gripping Ethan's fingers with sudden, crushing strength. Noah had seen it too. He knew something terrible was happening, even if he didn't fully understand what. Every atom of Ethan's being screamed at him to protect his child, to turn around, walk into the brightly lit grocery store, find a manager, call the police, let someone else handle this. Noah needed him. Noah was standing right here, vulnerable and small and depending on his father to keep him safe. What kind of person ran toward danger when their 6-year-old son needed them? But the girl's scream came again, weaker this time, more desperate, and Ethan knew with the kind of certainty that lives in your bones that if he walked away now, that sound would haunt him for the rest of his life. He would hear it in quiet moments. He would see her face in every newspaper story about missing girls. He would know that he had made a choice, and someone had disappeared because of it. Sarah had always said he had too much of his father in him, that stubborn, self-destructive instinct to step between danger and the vulnerable, consequences be damned. His wife had loved him for it and been infuriated by it in equal measure. Right now, in this parking lot, with their son's hand in his, Ethan understood why she'd worried. He was absolutely going to do something stupid. Noah. Ethan dropped to one knee, bringing himself eye level with his son. His hands gripped Noah's small shoulders, and he forced his voice to stay calm, even though his heart was hammering against his ribs. Noah, I need you to listen to me very carefully, okay? Dad, what's happening? Noah's voice trembled. I need you to run to the store entrance right now. Don't stop. Don't look back. When you get inside, find someone who works there, someone with a name tag, and tell them to call 911. Can you do that? But Dad, Noah. Ethan made his voice firm, the tone he used when there was no room for negotiation. Run to the store. Tell them to call the police. Tell them there's an emergency in the parking lot. Say it back to me. Run to the store, find someone, call 911, emergency in the parking lot. Noah's chin trembled, but his voice was steady. But what are you going to do? Ethan pulled his son into a quick, fierce hug. He smelled like paint and grape juice and the strawberry shampoo they used because it didn't sting if it got in his eyes. For one heartbeat, Ethan let himself feel the solid warmth of his child, this person he loved more than breathing, this little boy who had already lost his mother and couldn't lose his father too. I'm going to help someone, Ethan said. Now run, fast as you can. He released Noah and gave him a gentle push toward the store entrance. His son hesitated for one more second, long enough for their eyes to meet, for Ethan to see the fear and confusion and trust all mixed together in Noah's face. And then the boy ran. Ethan watched just long enough to see Noah's small form sprinting toward the bright lights of the grocery store entrance, his dinosaur backpack bouncing with each step. Then he turned back toward the black SUV, and everything else fell away. The man had gotten the girl halfway into the vehicle. She was still fighting, her legs kicking wildly, but she was clearly weakening. From this distance, Ethan could hear the man's voice, low, threatening, the words indistinct but the tone unmistakable. This was someone used to intimidation, to overpowering, to getting what he wanted through force. Ethan started running. He wasn't in particularly good shape. The last time he'd exercised with any regularity had been 3 years ago, before Sarah got sick, when they'd still had the energy and time for morning jogs together. Now his days consisted of sitting at a desk, driving to and from school pickups, and occasionally chasing Noah around the backyard. His lungs burned almost immediately as he sprinted across the parking lot, and his dress shoes, worn leather Oxfords that desperately needed replacing, slapped loudly against the asphalt. The sound must have alerted the attacker. The man's head whipped around, and even from 20 yards away, Ethan could see his expression change. Surprise, then calculation, then cold determination. This wasn't someone who scared easily. "Hey!" Ethan's shout came out rougher than he intended, his breath already ragged. "Let her go!" The man said something to the girl, something that made her go suddenly still, and then he released her and turned fully toward Ethan. The girl collapsed, half in, half out of the SUV, gasping. Ethan had maybe 10 yards to close before he reached them. His mind was racing, trying to remember the self-defense class he'd taken in college 15 years ago, trying to plan what he would do when he actually reached this man who was significantly larger and clearly more prepared for violence than Ethan had ever been. He had no plan. He was operating on pure adrenaline and the knowledge that turning back wasn't an option anymore. The man took 2 steps forward, meeting Ethan's charge, and that was when Ethan realized just how badly he'd misjudged this situation. The attacker moved with the fluid confidence of someone who knew how to fight, his weight balanced, his hands already coming up in a defensive posture that spoke of training or experience or both. Ethan had time to think, "I've made a terrible mistake," before the man's fist connected with his jaw. The punch wasn't Hollywood dramatic. It didn't send Ethan flying backward through the air or cause him to see cartoon stars. It was just sudden, shocking pain, a burst of white light behind his eyes, and the immediate taste of copper in his mouth. The world tilted sideways, and Ethan's legs forgot how they worked. He stumbled, barely kept his feet under him, and raised his arms in some clumsy approximation of defense. The man didn't give him time to recover. A second punch caught Ethan in the ribs, driving the air from his lungs in a painful whoosh. The ground seemed to lurch up toward him, and Ethan found himself on his hands and knees on the cold asphalt, trying to remember how to breathe. "Stupid," the man said above him. His voice was flat, almost bored. "Should have minded your own business." Through the haze of pain, Ethan heard the girl moving, a scraping sound as she tried to pull herself out of the SUV. The man heard it too. He turned away from Ethan, dismissing him as neutralized, and reached for the girl again. That was his mistake. Ethan might not have been a fighter, but he was a father. He'd spent 6 years being woken up by nightmares and twisted ankles and stomach flus. He'd functioned on 4 hours of sleep while holding down a full-time job. He'd learned to push through exhaustion and fear and pain because someone small and helpless depended on him, and giving up simply wasn't an option. He wasn't going to quit now. Ethan lunged forward from his position on the ground, wrapping both arms around the man's legs in something that was part tackle, part desperate grab. It wasn't graceful or tactical. It was just the only thing he could reach. They went down together in a tangle of limbs, the man's knee catching Ethan in the shoulder, someone's elbow slamming into someone else's face. "Get out of here!" Ethan shouted toward the girl, his voice strained. "Run!" The man was swearing now, trying to shake Ethan off, but Ethan held on with every ounce of strength he had. They rolled across the asphalt, Ethan taking the worst of it, feeling the rough surface scraping through his jacket and shirt, tearing skin. The man got an arm free and brought his elbow down hard into Ethan's back, once, twice, 3 times. Each impact sent jolts of pain through Ethan's spine, made his grip weaken. But he didn't let go. The girl was screaming again, but this time it was different. She was screaming for help, her voice carrying across the parking lot. Somewhere in the distance, Ethan heard other voices, people responding, but they seemed impossibly far away. The man realized what was happening. He changed tactics, no longer trying to pull free, but instead focusing all his violence on making Ethan release him. A punch caught Ethan in the temple, making his vision swim with black spots. Another hit his ribs in the same place as before, and something made a concerning cracking sound that Ethan knew would hurt much worse once the adrenaline wore off. "Let go!" The man's voice had lost its flat calm. He sounded angry now, almost panicked. Ethan's response was to hold tighter, even though his arms were shaking with the effort. even though blood from his split lip was running down his chin, even though every breath sent sharp pains through his chest. He didn't have words anymore. He just had this. His arms locked around this man's legs. His entire world narrowed to the single purpose of not letting go. The man slammed Ethan's head against the asphalt. Once. Twice. On the third impact, Ethan's grip finally loosened, his arms going weak as stars exploded across his vision. He felt the man pull free, heard the scrambling sounds of movement, tried to force his body to respond but found himself unable to do more than lie there, tasting blood and asphalt. This was it then. He'd tried and failed. The man would grab the girl, get in the SUV, and disappear, and Ethan would lie here bleeding in a parking lot, having accomplished nothing except getting himself beaten half to death and traumatizing his son in the process. But then other voices, closer now, multiple people, shouting, running footsteps. Someone yelling, "I called the cops," and someone else yelling, "Get away from her." The cavalry had arrived, drawn by the girl's screams and Ethan's desperate struggle. There were witnesses now, people with phones, people recording, people forming a barrier between the attacker and any chance of escape. Through his blurred vision, Ethan saw the man make a split-second decision. He abandoned the girl, sprinted for the SUV's driver door, and threw himself inside. The engine roared to life, tires squealed, and the vehicle lurched into motion, speeding toward the parking lot exit. But it only made it about 50 yards before it had to stop. Another car was blocking the way, having pulled across the exit lane deliberately. Behind the wheel, a middle-aged woman with her phone to her ear was describing the SUV to what had to be a 911 dispatcher. The man tried to back up, to find another route, but more cars were moving now, boxing him in, people who had decided they weren't going to let him escape. Ethan managed to roll onto his side in time to see the man abandon his vehicle and run on foot, disappearing into the gathering darkness at the edge of the parking lot. It didn't matter. The sirens were already audible in the distance, getting closer. He wouldn't get far. Someone knelt beside Ethan. Sir, don't try to move. Ambulance is coming." Ethan tried to respond but only managed to groan. His entire body hurt in ways he didn't know were possible. His head felt like it had been split open. His ribs screamed with each breath. The left side of his face was already swelling, his eye puffy and half closed. "Where's my son?" he managed to whisper. "Noah, grocery store." "Someone's getting him," the voice assured him. "He's safe. He's the one who got help. That little boy ran in screaming for someone to call 911. He saved you both." The relief that washed through Ethan at those words was so powerful it nearly knocked him unconscious. Noah was safe. Noah had done exactly what Ethan had told him to do. His brave, smart, wonderful boy. "The girl?" Ethan asked. "She's okay. Shaken up, but okay. You got to her in time." More people were gathering now, forming a protective circle. Someone was draping a jacket over Ethan's shoulders. Someone else was talking to the teenage girl, who was sitting on the ground near the SUV, hugging her knees to her chest and sobbing. She looked young, 15, maybe 16, with long dark hair and a torn jacket. Her face was bruised, her eyes wide with shock. The sirens were very close now. Flashing lights painted the parking lot in alternating red and blue, turning everything into a surreal, dreamlike scene. Ethan let his head rest against the asphalt and closed his eyes, just for a moment, just to rest. "Dad!" Noah's voice cut through the haze like a lifeline. Ethan forced his eyes open to see his son running toward him, a police officer trying and failing to keep him back. Noah's face was streaked with tears, his eyes huge and terrified. "I'm okay, buddy," Ethan managed, though speaking made his jaw throb. "I'm okay." Noah crashed to his knees beside Ethan, his small hands hovering over his father's battered face like he wanted to touch but was afraid to hurt him. "You're bleeding," he whispered. "Dad, you're bleeding a lot." "Just looks worse than it is." Ethan tried to smile, though he suspected it came out more like a grimace. "You did so good, Noah. You were so brave. I'm so proud of you." "You said to run to the store," Noah said, his voice breaking. "You said to get help, and I did, but you were out here getting hurt, and I couldn't. Hey, look at me." Ethan caught his son's hand, held it despite the pain that shot through his arm at the movement. "You saved us. You understand? You did exactly the right thing. You're my hero." The paramedics arrived then, gently moving Noah aside so they could assess Ethan's injuries. He let them work, answering their questions when he could, allowing them to shine lights in his eyes and probe his ribs and check his skull for fractures. The police were everywhere now, securing the scene, interviewing witnesses, examining the abandoned SUV. Through it all, Ethan kept his eyes on Noah, who was being looked after by a kind-faced female officer. His son was wrapped in someone's jacket, clutching his dinosaur backpack to his chest like a lifeline. Their eyes met across the chaos, and Ethan tried to communicate everything he couldn't say out loud, that he loved him, that he was sorry for scaring him, that everything was going to be okay. He hoped it was true. They loaded Ethan onto a stretcher eventually, despite his protests that he could walk. One of the paramedics, a young woman with kind eyes and firm hands, wasn't having any of his objections. "Sir, you have at least 2 cracked ribs, probable concussion, and enough contusions to make you a medical textbook. You're going to the hospital. My son is coming with you. Officer Rodriguez will drive him and meet us there." Ethan relaxed slightly. They weren't being separated. That was something. As they wheeled him toward the ambulance, the stretcher passed close to where the teenage girl was sitting, now also being evaluated by paramedics. She looked up as they went by, and their eyes met for the first time since it had all started. Hers were brown, red-rimmed from crying, and filled with something that looked like disbelief mixed with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for—" Her voice broke, and she couldn't finish. She didn't need to. Ethan managed a small nod. "What's your name?" he asked. Maya Reynolds." "I'm Ethan. That's Noah." He gestured with his chin toward his son. "You're safe now, Maya. Okay? You're safe." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and then the paramedics were loading Ethan into the ambulance and Noah was climbing in after him, and the doors were closing on the scene in the parking lot. As they pulled away, sirens wailing, Ethan let his head fall back against the thin pillow and closed his eyes. The adrenaline was wearing off now, letting the full extent of his injuries make themselves known. Everything hurt. Everything. But Maya Reynolds was safe. The man was in custody. He'd heard one of the officers say they'd caught him trying to flee on foot 3 blocks away, and Noah was here, his small hand wrapped around Ethan's, his presence the only anchor Ethan needed. At the hospital, the night became a blur of X-rays and CT scans, of doctors shining lights in his eyes and asking him repeatedly what year it was and who was president. 3 cracked ribs, they confirmed, plus a mild concussion, severe bruising, and a collection of cuts and scrapes that would make showering painful for the next week. They wanted to keep him overnight for observation. Noah refused to leave his side, even when the nurses tried to set him up in the waiting room. Eventually, they gave up and brought in a cot, letting the 6-year-old camp out next to his father's hospital bed. Ethan lay there in the darkness, listening to his son's breathing gradually slow and even out as exhaustion finally claimed him, and tried to process what had happened. He'd run toward danger tonight. He'd left his son, his precious, vulnerable son who'd already lost one parent, standing in a parking lot while he threw himself into a situation that could easily have gotten him killed. What kind of father did that? What kind of person risked orphaning their child to save a stranger? But even as the questions circled his mind, Ethan knew he'd make the same choice again. Because the alternative, walking away, letting Maya Reynolds disappear into that SUV, spending the rest of his life wondering what had happened to her, was unthinkable. Some things were worth the risk. Some things demanded you be better than your fear. Sarah would have understood. She'd always understood. Ethan's eyes drifted closed, the hospital machines beeping softly in the background, and for the first time since his wife had died, he felt something other than the hollow ache of grief and exhaustion. He felt, buried under all the pain and fear, the smallest seed of something that might have been purpose. He'd done something tonight, something that mattered, and somehow, impossibly, they'd both survived. Outside his hospital window, the winter night deepened, and somewhere across town, a mother named Rachel Reynolds was getting the phone call that would change everything. The call saying her daughter was safe, that a stranger had intervened, that the worst hadn't happened after all. The story was just beginning. The morning arrived with the kind of pale, hesitant light that seemed apologetic about existing at all. Ethan woke to the sound of mechanical beeping and the antiseptic smell of hospital disinfectant, his body registering pain before his mind fully caught up with where he was or why everything hurt so much. For a few confused seconds, he thought he was back in the same hospital 3 years ago, keeping vigil beside Sarah's bed during those final terrible weeks, and panic seized his chest with iron fingers. Then he heard Noah's soft breathing from the cot beside him, and reality reassembled itself in sharp, uncomfortable pieces. The parking lot, the SUV, Maya Reynolds. The fight that had left him feeling like he'd been hit by a truck. Ethan turned his head carefully. Even that small movement sent spikes of pain through his neck, and looked at his son. Noah was curled on his side, one arm tucked under his head, his dinosaur backpack still clutched against his chest like a security blanket. His face in sleep looked impossibly young, peaceful in a way that made Ethan's throat tighten. The boy had seen his father get beaten half to death last night. That wasn't something a 6-year-old should have to witness, should have to carry. "You're awake." A nurse appeared in the doorway, her voice professionally quiet. She was older, maybe in her 50s, with the kind of competent warmth that suggested she'd seen everything and still managed to care. "How's the pain? Scale of 1 to 10? 7, Ethan said, though honestly it felt closer to 9. But he'd learned during Sarah's illness that downplaying pain got you out of hospitals faster, and he desperately wanted to take Noah home, away from the beeping machines and the smell that would forever remind Ethan of death. The nurse's expression suggested she didn't believe him but wasn't going to argue. "I'll get you something for that. Doctor wants to do one more evaluation before discharge. There's also a Detective Martinez who'd like to speak with you when you're up for it." Ethan nodded, immediately regretted the motion as his vision swam, and waited for his head to stop spinning before attempting to speak again. "My son! We'll let him sleep. Poor little guy was up half the night worrying about you." The nurse checked his IV, made a note on her tablet. "Quite the hero you've got there. The whole staff's been talking about how he ran in screaming for help. Most kids would have frozen." Pride and guilt warred in Ethan's chest. He shouldn't have had to do that. "No," the nurse agreed, meeting his eyes with unexpected directness. "But he did. And because of that, you're both here. That girl too. Sometimes we don't get to choose when courage is required, Mr. Cole. We just have to hope we find it when the moment comes." She patted his shoulder gently, avoiding the worst of the bruising. "I'll be back with that pain medication." After she left, Ethan lay there watching the winter sun strengthen slowly beyond the window, thinking about her words. He'd never thought of himself as particularly courageous. Courage was what Sarah had shown, facing terminal cancer with grace and humor, making videos for Noah to watch on future birthdays she knew she'd never see. Courage was what soldiers and firefighters had, people who trained for danger and ran toward it anyway. What Ethan had done felt less like courage and more like the inability to walk away. A compulsion he couldn't have resisted even if he'd wanted to. Was that the same thing? Or was it just a different flavor of the same stubborn streak that had gotten him through Sarah's death? The sheer refusal to let circumstances break him, even when breaking would have been easier. Noah stirred on his cot, made a small sound, and his eyes fluttered open. For a moment, he looked confused, disoriented, and then his gaze found Ethan, and his whole face crumpled. "Hey, buddy." Ethan held out his hand, and Noah scrambled up, crossing the small space between them to grab it with both of his own. "I'm okay, see? Still here." "You looked so bad last night," Noah whispered, his voice thick with tears he was trying not to shed. "There was so much blood, and you couldn't stand up, and I thought, come here." Ethan shifted carefully to make room on the hospital bed, biting back a gasp as his ribs protested the movement. Noah climbed up next to him, gentle despite being 6, and Ethan wrapped an arm around his son's small shoulders. They lay there together in the early morning light, Noah's head pressed against Ethan's shoulder, both of them taking comfort in the solid reality of the other's presence. "I'm sorry I scared you," Ethan said softly. "That wasn't fair to you." "Why did you do it?" Noah's question was muffled against Ethan's hospital gown. "Why didn't you just call the police like you told me to?" It was a fair question, a good question. The kind of question Ethan had been asking himself all night during the moments when sleep wouldn't come. He tried to find an answer that would make sense to a 6-year-old, that wouldn't sound like he'd valued a stranger's life over being there for his own son. You know how sometimes you see something happening on the playground, Ethan began slowly, and you know it's wrong, and you know someone should help, but everyone's just watching? Noah nodded against his chest. Last night, I was the only one close enough to help right then. If I'd waited, if I'd walked away to call for help, it might have been too late. Sometimes you have to act first and think later. But you could have died. Noah's voice was very small. Like Mom. There it was. The fear that lived in both of them now, the shadow that followed every cough, every late arrival, every moment when the world felt too fragile to trust. Noah had learned too young that parents could disappear, that safety was an illusion, that the people you loved most could be taken without warning. I could have, Ethan admitted, because lying would have been worse. And if I had, that would have been terrible. You would have been so sad and angry and scared. But that girl, Maya, she would have disappeared. And her family would have been sad and angry and scared too, forever, not knowing what happened to her. He paused, trying to find the right words. I don't know if I made the right choice, Noah. I just made the only choice I could live with. Noah was quiet for a long moment, processing this with the serious intensity he brought to everything. Finally, he said, Mom would have done the same thing. She always said you help people even when it's hard. Ethan felt his eyes burn with tears he couldn't quite hold back. Yeah, she would have. They stayed like that until the nurse returned with pain medication, and the doctor arrived for his evaluation. The doctor was young, energetic, and entirely too cheerful for someone examining a man who looked like he'd gone 3 rounds with a heavyweight boxer. He poked and prodded, asked Ethan to follow a light with his eyes, tested his reflexes, and finally declared him fit for discharge with a lengthy list of instructions about rest, ice, and signs of complications to watch for. You're lucky, the doctor said, making notes on his tablet. Could have been a lot worse. Try not to make a habit of this, okay? Wasn't planning on it, Ethan assured him. Detective Martinez arrived as Ethan was getting dressed, moving gingerly to avoid jarring his ribs. The detective was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an air of having seen too much of humanity's worst impulses. She waited patiently while Ethan struggled into his shirt. Someone had brought clothes from his house, though he couldn't remember giving anyone his address, and then gestured to the chair beside his bed. Mind if we talk for a few minutes? Ethan nodded, then caught himself and just said, sure, instead. Noah had been taken by the nurse to get breakfast, giving them privacy. Detective Martinez pulled out a small notebook, the old-fashioned paper kind rather than a tablet. First, I want to thank you for what you did last night. Zachary Hendricks, that's the man you stopped, is wanted in 3 states for kidnapping, assault, and trafficking. We've been looking for him for 8 months. Maya Reynolds would have been his 4th victim that we know of. Because you intervened, she's home safe, and he's in custody. The words landed with unexpected weight. 4th victim. That meant 3 other girls who hadn't been as lucky. 3 families destroyed. Ethan felt simultaneously sick and grateful that he hadn't known this last night, hadn't understood exactly what he was running toward. I need to get your statement, the detective continued. Walk me through everything from the moment you first became aware of the situation. Ethan did, starting with the scream in the parking lot and ending with waking up in the hospital. Detective Martinez listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes, her expression carefully neutral. When he finished, she asked a few clarifying questions about the timeline, about exactly what Hendricks had said, about whether Ethan had seen anyone else in or near the vehicle. And you'd never seen Maya Reynolds before last night? She asked. No connection to her family, her school, anything? Never. Didn't even know her name until after. The detective nodded, making a final note. Hendricks is claiming you attacked him unprovoked. Says he was helping Maya, that she'd fallen, and he was trying to get her medical attention, and you came out of nowhere and assaulted him. Ethan stared at her. That's insane. She was screaming, fighting him. There were witnesses. I know, we have multiple witness statements that corroborate your version, plus security footage from the store's parking lot that shows the struggle. He's grasping at straws. Detective Martinez closed her notebook. But I wanted you to be aware he's going that route. His lawyer's probably going to try to paint you as some kind of vigilante, someone with a history of violence or instability. They'll dig into your background, your life. It won't go anywhere. The evidence is too clear, but it might get uncomfortable. I don't have a history of violence. Ethan heard the defensiveness in his own voice. I've never even been in a fight before last night. I know. Your record's clean. You're a software engineer, single father, by all accounts a regular guy who did something extraordinary. She stood, tucking the notebook into her jacket pocket. But lawyers do what lawyers do. Just wanted you prepared. She paused at the door, turned back. Maya's mother wants to see you, Rachel Reynolds. She's called the hospital 3 times this morning asking if you're awake. I told her to give you some time, but she's pretty insistent, if you're up for it. Ethan wasn't sure he was up for anything except going home and sleeping for a week, but he heard himself saying, "Okay, yeah, I can talk to her. I'll let her know." Detective Martinez gave him something that might have been a smile. "You did good, Mr. Cole. Don't let anyone tell you different." After she left, Ethan finished dressing and found Noah in the hallway, chocolate milk mustache decorating his upper lip, looking more like his normal self. They went through the discharge process, more forms than seemed reasonable for someone who just wanted to leave, and finally stepped out into the cold December morning. The Honda was in the hospital parking garage, where someone had apparently driven it from the grocery store. Ethan didn't remember giving permission for that either, but right now he was just grateful not to need a cab. Getting Noah buckled into his booster seat sent fresh waves of pain through Ethan's ribs, and by the time he collapsed into the driver's seat, he was sweating despite the cold. "Dad, you look really pale," Noah observed from the back seat. "Just need to get home, buddy, then I'll be fine." The drive back to their small house in the suburbs felt surreal. Everything looked exactly the same. The same streets, same stores, same neighbors' houses, with their holiday decorations still up, even though Christmas had passed weeks ago. But Ethan felt different, like he'd crossed some invisible line and couldn't quite find his way back to the person he'd been yesterday morning. Their house was a modest 3-bedroom ranch that had been too big when they'd bought it, with dreams of more children, too full when it was the 3 of them, and too empty after Sarah died. Ethan pulled into the driveway, noting the lawn needed mowing and the gutters needed cleaning, and the mailbox was still crooked from when Noah had accidentally backed into it with his bike. Normal problems. Manageable problems. Inside, everything was exactly as they'd left it. Noah's art supplies still spread across the kitchen table from yesterday's homework. Ethan's coffee mug from Thursday morning still sitting in the sink. The calendar on the wall still showing Thursday's notation. Pickup N. Art class. Grocery shopping. They'd planned to grab dinner at the grocery store deli. Instead, they'd ended up in a hospital. "Can I watch TV?" Noah asked, hovering uncertainly in the doorway like he wasn't sure what the rules were anymore. "Sure. Whatever you want." Ethan lowered himself carefully onto the couch, every muscle protesting. "Actually, come sit with me for a minute first." Noah climbed up next to him, and they sat together in the quiet house, neither of them quite knowing what came next. The enormity of what had almost happened was starting to sink in, not just for Ethan, but for Noah too. His son's hand crept into his, and they sat like that for a long time, drawing comfort from each other's presence. The phone rang around noon, an unfamiliar number. Ethan almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Cole? This is Rachel Reynolds, Maya's mother." The woman's voice was thick with emotion, barely controlled. "I'm sorry to bother you. I know you must be recovering, but I had to call. I had to tell you." Her voice broke, and Ethan heard her take a shaky breath. "You saved my daughter's life. I don't know how to thank you for that. I don't know if there are even words." "You don't need to thank me," Ethan said automatically, uncomfortable with the weight of her gratitude. "Anyone would have—" "No!" Rachel's voice was firm now, almost fierce. "No, they wouldn't have. There were other people in that parking lot. They didn't run toward danger. They didn't put themselves between a violent man and my child. You did that. You risked your life, and you have a son. I know you have a son, the police told me, and you still ran to help a stranger's daughter." Ethan didn't know what to say to that. The silence stretched between them, filled with all the things that couldn't quite be expressed. "I'd like to meet you," Rachel continued. "When you're feeling better, just to, I don't know, to say thank you in person, to let Maya thank you. She's been asking about you, about the man who helped her. She needs to know you're okay." Something in her voice, the rawness of it, the barely suppressed panic, resonated with something in Ethan. He recognized it. It was the sound of a parent who had almost lost their child and was still trying to process the magnitude of that almost. He'd felt it during Sarah's illness, that sick terror every time her condition worsened, the constant awareness that the worst could happen at any moment. "Okay," he heard himself say. "Yeah, we could do that." They made plans to meet for coffee later in the week, once Ethan's face looked less like he'd been in a car accident. After hanging up, he sat there with the phone in his hand, wondering what you were supposed to talk about with someone whose child you'd saved. It felt too big, too heavy, like trying to have a casual conversation about something that had fundamentally altered the trajectories of multiple lives. The week that followed was strange. Word had gotten out about what happened. A combination of local news coverage and social media meant that Ethan's act was suddenly public knowledge. His phone filled with messages from people he hadn't spoken to in years, everyone wanting to tell him he was a hero, to congratulate him, to express their admiration. Ethan hated it. He wasn't a hero. Heroes were people who rushed into burning buildings or stopped bullets meant for others. He was just a guy who'd made a split-second decision in a parking lot and gotten lucky enough to survive it. The praise felt unearned, embarrassing, like wearing clothes that didn't fit. Noah's school found out, which meant other parents found out, which meant pickup on Monday was an exercise in awkward conversations. Everyone wanted to talk to him, to tell him how brave he'd been, to ask about his injuries. More than one parent said something like, "I don't know if I could have done that," in a tone that suggested they were sure they couldn't have, and Ethan never knew how to respond. Was he supposed to agree? Disagree? Insist that anyone would have done the same, even though he was increasingly certain that wasn't true? What bothered him most was the way people looked at Noah with a kind of pitying admiration, like the boy was some kind of victim-hero hybrid. His son didn't need that. He needed normal. He needed to just be a 6-year-old whose biggest concerns were whether they'd have pizza for dinner, and if his dad would read him an extra story at bedtime. By Wednesday, when they were supposed to meet Rachel and Maya Reynolds at a coffee shop across town, Ethan was tempted to cancel. His ribs still hurt if he moved too quickly. His face had turned an impressive palette of purple, yellow, and green as the bruises evolved. And he was exhausted, not physically tired, but emotionally worn down by the constant attention, the endless retelling, the weight of everyone's expectations about who he was supposed to be now. But he'd made a promise, so Wednesday afternoon found him and Noah walking into a small coffee shop called The Daily Grind, where Rachel Reynolds had said she'd be waiting. She was easy to spot, a woman in her early 40s sitting alone at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a mug like she was trying to draw warmth from it. She looked up as they entered, and Ethan saw the moment she recognized him. Her eyes went wide, then filled with tears, and she stood so quickly she almost knocked over her coffee. "Mr. Cole." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Ethan, please." He extended his hand and she took it in both of hers, holding on longer than was strictly comfortable, her grip tight and trembling. "Rachel, and this is—" She looked down at Noah, who was half hiding behind his father's legs. "You must be Noah. Your dad told me about you, about how brave you were." Noah peeked out, studying her with the careful assessment only children seemed capable of. Whatever he saw must have passed muster, because he stepped forward and said, very seriously, "Is your daughter okay? The girl my dad helped?" Rachel's face crumpled slightly, but she held it together. "She is. She's home, she's safe, and she's here, actually. She wanted to come, to meet both of you, but she's—" Rachel gestured vaguely, searching for words. "She's having a hard day. Some days are better than others right now. She's in the car with her older brother. I didn't want to push her if she wasn't ready." Ethan understood. Trauma didn't follow neat timelines or convenient schedules. "That's fine. Whenever she's ready. Or never, if that's what she needs." "Would you— do you think she could just see you through the window?" Rachel looked almost desperate. "She keeps asking if you're real. If what happened was real. and I think seeing you might help, but I understand if that's too much. It's fine, Ethan said, because what else could he say? They moved to the window, and Rachel gestured to a silver sedan parked near the entrance. In the back seat, Ethan could make out a teenage girl with long, dark hair. Even from this distance, he could see how she stiffened when she spotted them, how her hand came up to press against the window. Maya Reynolds. She looked different than she had in the parking lot, younger somehow, more fragile. Her face was partially hidden behind oversized sunglasses, but Ethan could see the edge of a bruise on her jaw. She stared at him for a long moment, and then slowly, deliberately, she raised her hand in a small wave. Ethan waved back, and beside him, Noah did too. The girl's shoulders seemed to relax slightly. She said something to whoever was in the front seat, her brother presumably, and then she was opening the car door, stepping out into the cold afternoon. "She wants to come in," Rachel said, sounding surprised. "She hasn't wanted to go anywhere since, but she's getting out of the car." They watched as Maya walked across the parking lot, moving slowly, carefully, like someone navigating a minefield. She pushed through the coffee shop door and stopped just inside, her hands shoved deep into her jacket pockets, her sunglasses still firmly in place. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Maya pulled off her sunglasses with shaking hands, and Ethan saw her eyes, brown and red-rimmed and full of something that looked like desperate gratitude mixed with bone-deep fear. "You're real," she said. Her voice was rough, barely audible. "I kept thinking maybe I made you up, that maybe no one actually came." "I'm real," Ethan confirmed gently. "And you're safe." Maya nodded, but the motion seemed uncertain, like she wasn't sure she believed it. "Mom says you got really hurt. Because of me." "Not because of you," Ethan corrected firmly. "Because of the man who tried to take you. That's not your fault, Maya. None of this is your fault." She stared at him for a long moment, and Ethan saw her mother's face in hers. The same bone structure, the same fierce determination, trying to hold back tears. Then, without warning, Maya stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him in a fierce hug. Ethan froze, every instinct screaming not to cause this traumatized teenager any additional fear, but she was already pulling back, wiping at her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not walking away." "You're welcome," Ethan managed, his own voice rough. They sat together at the corner table, the five of them, Ethan and Noah, Rachel and Maya's older brother Marcus, who turned out to be a quiet 19-year-old studying engineering at the community college. It should have been awkward, but somehow it wasn't. Maybe because they'd already been through the worst thing together. Everything else was just conversation. Rachel was a single mother too, Ethan learned. Divorced 3 years ago, working as a nurse at the same hospital where Ethan had been treated. She had the same tired eyes Ethan saw in his own mirror every morning, the same slight edge of panic that came from being solely responsible for keeping small humans alive and functional. Maya was 15, a sophomore at Lincoln High School. She liked art and hated math and was on the junior varsity volleyball team, though she hadn't been back to practice since the incident. She was quieter than her mother, more guarded, but when Noah asked her about her favorite dinosaur, she answered with surprising enthusiasm, and they ended up in a deep discussion about whether velociraptors or T-Rexes would win in a fight. Watching his son interact with Maya, both of them so serious, so earnest, Ethan felt something shift in his chest. This was what he'd saved. Not just a life, but a whole person. Someone with favorite colors and strong opinions about dinosaurs, and a family who loved her. The abstract concept of saving someone became suddenly, viscerally real. They talked for 2 hours, conversation flowing more easily than Ethan would have thought possible. Rachel told stories about Maya as a child, and Ethan found himself sharing stories about Noah, about Sarah, about the strange, difficult beauty of single parenthood. Marcus mostly listened, but occasionally contributed a dry observation that made everyone laugh. And Maya slowly began to relax. Not completely. Ethan noticed how she kept her back to the wall, how her eyes tracked every person who entered the shop, how she startled when someone dropped a cup behind the counter. But by the end of those 2 hours, she was smiling occasionally, and her shoulders had dropped from up around her ears. "We should do this again," Rachel said as they prepared to leave, and it didn't sound like a polite obligation. It sounded like a genuine desire for connection. Maybe dinner? Next week? Ethan found himself agreeing, even though his life was already too full, too complicated. Maybe that was the point. Maybe adding more complexity, more connection, was exactly what they both needed. As they walked back to their cars, Maya hung back slightly, and Ethan slowed to match her pace. She didn't look at him when she spoke, her eyes fixed on her shoes. "Do you have nightmares?" she asked quietly. "About that night?" Ethan considered lying, considered offering something comforting and false. But Maya deserved honesty. "Yeah," he admitted, "sometimes. I dream that I'm not fast enough, that I don't reach you in time. Or I dream that the man has a weapon I didn't see, and Noah has to watch me." He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Maya nodded slowly. "I dream that no one comes, that I'm alone, and no one hears me screaming, and I just disappear." She was quiet for a moment. "But then I wake up, and I'm in my room, and my mom's down the hall, and I remember that someone did come. You came." "I wish you didn't have to have those dreams at all," Ethan said. "Me too, but—" Maya finally looked up at him, and her eyes were clear, direct. "My therapist says the nightmares will get better. She says trauma takes time to heal, but it does heal usually, and she says having people who make you feel safe helps." "Your therapist sounds smart." "She is." Maya smiled slightly. "She also says I should tell people when they've helped me. So, you make me feel safe, even just being around you. It's weird, but it's true." Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. They reached the cars, and Maya hugged him again, briefer this time, but just as fierce. Then she climbed into her mother's sedan, and Ethan and Noah got into their Honda, and they drove away in opposite directions, back to their separate lives that were somehow now connected. On the drive home, Noah was uncharacteristically quiet, staring out the window at the passing streets. Finally, he said, "Dad, do you think Maya will be okay? Like, really okay?" Ethan thought about that, about trauma and healing and the long road back from terrible things. "I think she'll have hard days and easier days. I think she'll probably always carry what happened with her, the same way we carry losing Mom. But yeah, buddy, I think she'll be okay. She's got people who love her, and she's brave, and she's getting help. That's a pretty good start." Noah seemed satisfied with this answer. After another moment of silence, he said, "I like them. Maya and her mom. Can we see them again?" "Yeah," Ethan said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. "Yeah, I think we can." The days continued, settling into a new rhythm. The bruises faded, the ribs healed. Life moved forward the way it always did, with grocery shopping and homework and work deadlines and the endless logistics of single parenthood. But something had shifted, some fundamental change that Ethan couldn't quite name. He felt more present somehow, more aware, like he'd been sleepwalking through his life since Sarah died, and had suddenly, violently woken up in that parking lot. The world seemed sharper, more immediate, full of possibility and danger in equal measure. And twice more that month, they met the Reynolds family, once for dinner at a casual restaurant where Maya laughed at Noah's jokes and taught him how to fold his napkin into origami shapes, and once at a park where they walked together in the cold, while the kids ran ahead and Rachel told Ethan about her own struggles with single parenthood, her fears, her failures, her small victories. They were becoming something, these two fractured families. Not quite friends yet, but something more than strangers. Connected by violence, but choosing to stay connected by something gentler, something more intentional. Ethan didn't know where it was leading. He just knew that for the first time in 3 years, when he looked toward the future, it didn't feel quite so empty. February arrived with the kind of cold that made your bones ache, the kind that turned morning frost into art on car windows and made every breath visible. Ethan stood in his kitchen at 6 in the morning, making coffee and watching Noah sleep through the doorway to his bedroom, and realized with something like surprise that he'd been sleeping through the nights lately. No nightmares. No waking at 3 a.m. with his heart racing and the taste of copper in his mouth. Just sleep, deep and dreamless. It had been 6 weeks since the parking lot. 6 weeks since his life had split into before and after, though he was only now beginning to understand the depth of that division. His phone buzzed on the counter, a text from Rachel Reynolds. Bad morning, Maya won't get out of bed for school, says she can't face people today. I don't know what to do. Ethan stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. In the weeks since their first coffee shop meeting, this had become something of a pattern. Rachel would reach out during the hard moments, not asking for advice exactly, but just needing to tell someone who understood. And Ethan found himself responding, offering what he could, which was mostly just presence. The knowledge that someone else was out there, awake at odd hours, fighting the same kind of invisible battles. He typed back, "Does she need space or distraction?" The response came quickly. "Don't know. Everything I try feels wrong." What if Noah and I came by after school, just to say hi, no pressure? She can stay in her room if she wants. A long pause. Then, "You'd do that?" "Yeah, we would." Another pause, longer this time. Ethan could almost feel Rachel's relief through the phone. "Thank you. Really. Thank you." It was a small thing, barely worth mentioning, but Ethan was learning that the small things mattered most in the aftermath of trauma. The texts that said someone was thinking of you. The offers that required no obligation. The steady presence that didn't demand anything in return. He'd learned this during Sarah's illness, during those endless months of treatment and false hopes and gradual decline. The people who'd helped most weren't the ones who'd swooped in with grand gestures or inspirational speeches. They were the ones who'd shown up consistently, who'd sat with him in silence when words failed, who'd just been there without needing him to be anything other than broken. That evening, after picking Noah up from school and enduring another round of homework battles over math problems that somehow made both of them want to cry, they drove across town to the Reynolds house. It was a modest two-story in an older neighborhood, with a front porch that needed painting and a yard that would be beautiful in spring, but now looked skeletal and sad under the gray winter sky. Rachel opened the door before they even knocked, like she'd been watching for them. She looked exhausted, her nurse's scrubs rumpled like she'd come straight from a shift, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. "Thank you for coming," she said, stepping aside to let them in. "I know this is weird, just showing up like this. I probably shouldn't have asked." "It's not weird," Ethan interrupted gently. "And you should have asked. That's what this is, right? Whatever this is." Rachel smiled, but it was fragile, close to breaking. "I don't know what this is. I've never had anything like this before." Neither had Ethan, but he was starting to think maybe that was okay. Maybe new things didn't need definitions or precedents. Maybe they just needed people willing to figure them out as they went. Inside, the house had the comfortable chaos of a place where people actually lived. Shoes by the door, mail stacked on the entry table, a cat winding between their legs with imperious demands for attention. Noah immediately crouched down to pet it, and the cat began purring loud enough to be heard across the room. "That's Pancake," Rachel said. "Fair warning, he's shameless about begging for attention." "I like him." Noah's voice had taken on the reverent tone he reserved for animals and dinosaur documentaries. "Can I keep petting him?" "As long as he'll let you." Marcus appeared from what looked like the kitchen, holding a sandwich and nodding at Ethan in greeting. The kid had become more talkative over their previous meetings, revealing a dry sense of humor and a protective streak toward his sister that Ethan recognized. He'd been the same way about Sarah during her illness, hovering nearby even when there was nothing he could do, just needing to be close. "Maya's upstairs," Marcus said quietly, directing his words to his mother. "She knows they're here. Don't know if she'll come down." "That's okay," Ethan said before Rachel could respond. "Like I said, no pressure. We're just here." They settled in the living room, which was warm and cluttered in a way that Ethan's carefully controlled house never was. Rachel brought coffee and Noah became engrossed in Pancake, and they talked about nothing important. Work and weather and the ridiculous amount of homework first graders were getting these days. Surface things, easy things, the kind of conversation that let everyone breathe. But Ethan kept glancing toward the staircase, wondering about the girl upstairs. Wondering what it felt like to be 15 and terrified of a world that had proven itself dangerous. Wondering if there was anything he could say or do that would help, or if his presence just made it worse by reminding her of what had happened. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Rachel's eyes kept drifting to the stairs too, worry carved into every line of her face. Marcus had retreated back to his room. Noah was lying on the floor, pancakes sprawled across his stomach, both of them looking supremely content. And then, so quietly, Ethan almost missed it, there was movement at the top of the stairs. Maya stood there in oversized sweatpants and a hoodie that might have belonged to her brother, her hair uncombed, her face pale. She looked younger than 15, more like 12 or 13, and so fragile that Ethan felt his chest tighten with protective instinct. "Hey," she said, her voice barely audible. "Hey yourself," Ethan replied, keeping his tone light. "Heard you were having a rough day." Maya descended a few steps, then sat down right there on the staircase, pulling her knees to her chest. "Every day feels rough lately. Today's just worse." Rachel moved like she was going to go to her daughter, but Ethan caught her eye and gave a tiny shake of his head. Sometimes the person struggling needed space more than comfort. Sometimes being crowded made everything harder. "What makes today worse?" Ethan asked. Maya was quiet for a long moment, picking at the frayed edge of her sweatpants. "There's a trial date. For Hendricks. The prosecutor called this morning. They want me to testify." The name landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of tension through the room. Zachary Hendricks. The man who'd tried to take Maya, who had taken 3 other girls before her, according to Detective Martinez, who would spend the rest of his life in prison if the justice system worked the way it was supposed to. "And you don't want to," Ethan said. Not a question. "I don't know if I can," Maya's voice cracked. Getting up in front of all those people, having to look at him, having to talk about what happened while he just sits there staring at me. She pressed her face against her knees. "I can't. I know the prosecutor says it's important, that my testimony could help convict him, but I can't." Rachel had tears on her face now, silent and steady. "Baby, you don't have to do anything you're not ready for. We'll figure something else out." "But what if he gets off because I'm too scared to testify? What if he hurts someone else because I couldn't be brave enough?" Maya looked up and her eyes found Ethan's. "You were brave. When it mattered, when someone needed help, you were brave. I can't even go to school without having panic attacks in the bathroom." Ethan felt the weight of her expectations like a physical thing. She'd built him up into something he wasn't, turned him into some kind of hero figure who had it all together, who moved through the world without fear. And he needed to correct that, needed her to understand that courage wasn't the absence of fear. "Maya, I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear it, okay?" He waited until she nodded. "That night in the parking lot, I was absolutely terrified, the whole time. When I was running toward that SUV, when I was fighting with Hendricks, when I thought he might kill me, I was scared out of my mind. My hands were shaking so bad afterward that I could barely hold my phone." "But you did it anyway," Maya whispered. "Yeah, but not because I'm naturally brave or fearless or any of that. I did it because sometimes being scared and doing the thing anyway is the only option we have." He paused, trying to find the right words. "You keep comparing yourself to me, to that moment. But Maya, you fought him. Before I got there, you were fighting. You didn't just let him take you. You screamed, you struggled, you fought like hell. That's brave." "It didn't feel brave, it felt like panic." "Brave things usually do." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "And if you decide you can't testify, that doesn't make you weak or less brave. It makes you human. You get to decide what you can handle and what you can't. Nobody else gets to make that call." Maya's eyes were full of tears now, spilling over onto her cheeks. "But I want to be brave. I want to stop being so scared all the time. I want to be able to go to school and volleyball practice and the grocery store without feeling like everyone's looking at me, without checking every car to make sure it's not a black SUV, without—" Her voice dissolved into sobs. Rachel was up the stairs in seconds, wrapping her arms around her daughter, and Maya collapsed into her mother's embrace. They sat there together on the staircase, Maya crying into Rachel's shoulder while Rachel murmured soft reassurances and stroked her daughter's hair. Noah had sat up from the floor, abandoning Pancake, and moved to stand next to Ethan's chair. His small hand found his father's, and he whispered, "Is Maya going to be okay?" "Yeah, buddy, she's just having a hard time right now, but she's going to be okay."
Like how you had hard times after mom died? Ethan looked down at his son, at this small person who saw and understood more than any 6-year-old should have to. Yeah, kind of like that. They stayed for another hour, the dynamic shifting into something quieter and more settled. Maya eventually came down the rest of the stairs and sat on the couch near her mother, still withdrawn but present. Noah, with the fearless social instincts of childhood, showed her the dinosaur drawing he'd done at school, and to everyone's surprise, Maya smiled. "That's actually pretty good," she said, examining the crayon pterodactyl. "The proportions are better than most kids your age could do." "I practice a lot," Noah said seriously. "Dad says practice makes better." "Not perfect?" Maya raised an eyebrow. "Dad says nothing's perfect, so we shouldn't try for it. Just try for better than yesterday." Ethan felt Rachel's eyes on him, a weight he couldn't quite interpret.
When he glanced over, she was looking at him with something that might have been gratitude or recognition or maybe just exhaustion. She mouthed, "Thank you," and he nodded, not entirely sure what he was being thanked for, but understanding that sometimes that didn't matter. When they finally left, close to 8 p.m., Maya walked them to the door. She stood there in her oversized hoodie, arms wrapped around herself, and said to Ethan, "Will you come back? Like, regularly?" "If you want us to, yeah." "I want you to." She glanced at Noah, then back to Ethan. "You make things feel less scary. I don't know why, but you do." In the car driving home, Noah fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted by the emotional weight of the evening. Ethan drove through the dark streets, his mind churning through everything that had happened, everything that had been said. He was becoming something to Maya that he hadn't signed up for, a symbol of safety, of protection, of the moment when the worst didn't happen. It was too much weight for one person to carry, too much responsibility. What happened when he inevitably failed to live up to that image? What happened when Maya realized he was just a regular person with his own fears and failures? But even as the thoughts circled, Ethan knew he wouldn't pull away. Couldn't pull away. Because Maya needed consistency right now more than she needed perfection, and he could provide that. He could show up. He could be present. He could offer the steady, boring reliability that trauma recovery actually required, even if it wasn't dramatic or heroic. The visits became regular after that. Twice a week, sometimes 3 times, Ethan and Noah would stop by the Reynolds house. Sometimes they'd stay for dinner, Rachel cooking while Ethan helped Noah with homework at the kitchen table, and Maya drifted in and out, joining the conversation when she felt up to it, retreating when she didn't. Sometimes they'd just sit together in the living room, the adults talking while the kids played with Pancake or worked on art projects. Slowly, imperceptibly, something was building between the two families, a foundation of trust and routine and shared space. Marcus started joining their conversations more, opening up about his struggles in college, his worries about money, and his future. Rachel talked about her nursing shifts, the impossible decisions and heartbreaking moments that came with the job. And Ethan found himself sharing stories about Sarah, about grief and single parenthood, and the daily work of continuing to exist when part of you had been carved away. But it was Maya's gradual transformation that struck Ethan most. The first time she laughed at one of Noah's terrible 6-year-old jokes, genuine and unguarded, Rachel had looked at Ethan with tears in her eyes. The first time Maya sat through an entire dinner without excusing herself to check the locks on the doors and windows, Ethan felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't realized was tight. She was healing. Not linearly, not perfectly, but healing nonetheless. And somehow, their presence was part of that healing. One evening in late February, Ethan arrived to find Maya in the living room with art supplies spread across the coffee table. She was drawing something, her face intent with concentration, and she barely looked up when they entered. "She's been working on that all afternoon," Rachel said quietly, leading Ethan into the kitchen. "Won't tell me what it is." "That's good though, right? The art?" Her therapist said creative expression helps. "Yeah, Rachel leaned against the counter, exhaustion written into every line of her body. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. For something else to go wrong. Is that terrible?" "That's trauma," Ethan said. "The hypervigilance, the waiting for disaster. I felt the same way for months after Sarah died. Every time Noah coughed, I was convinced it was the start of something terrible. Every time he was quiet too long, I thought something had happened. Does it get better? Yeah, eventually. The gaps between panic get longer. You start to believe again that good things can just be good, that they don't have to be hiding something worse. Rachel studied him for a long moment. You're different than I expected, you know. When I first heard about what you did, I imagined this tough, fearless type. Someone who runs toward danger because they don't feel fear the way normal people do. But you're just a regular person? A good person. She said it simply, like it was an observable fact. Someone who's scared and does it anyway. Someone who shows up even when it's hard. That's actually more impressive than fearless. Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. They stood in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds from the living room. Noah chattering to Maya about his latest dinosaur obsession, Maya's occasional responses, the scratch of pencil on paper. Can I ask you something? Rachel's voice was careful, tentative. And you can absolutely say no, but the trial is in 6 weeks. Maya still doesn't know if she can testify, but she said she might be able to if you were there in the courtroom. Would that be something you'd consider? Ethan's first instinct was to say yes immediately, to agree to anything that might help Maya, but he forced himself to think it through. Sitting in a courtroom while Maya testified meant facing Hendricks again, hearing in detail what had almost happened, being present for something that would inevitably be traumatic for everyone involved. But it also meant Maya wouldn't be alone. It meant one more person who made her feel safe would be in that room with her. Yeah, he said finally. Yeah, I can do that. Relief flooded Rachel's face. Thank you. I know it's a lot to ask. I know you have your own life and your own problems, and you don't owe us anything. Rachel. Ethan waited until she stopped talking, until she met his eyes. I'm not here out of obligation. None of us are. We're here because we want to be. Why? The question was soft, almost wondering. Why do you keep showing up for us? I still don't understand. Ethan thought about that, about the true answer beneath the easy ones. Finally, he said, because you needed someone to show up, and I could. And because somewhere in all of this, you became people I care about. All of you. That's not obligation. That's just what it is. From the living room, Maya called out, Ethan, can you come look at this? He found her holding up a drawing, and what he saw made his breath catch. It was the parking lot scene, rendered in careful detail with colored pencils. But it wasn't the violence she'd captured. It was the moment after, Ethan kneeling beside her, one hand extended, his face gentle with concern. Her own face was turned toward him, fear and hope mixed together in her expression. And in the background, barely visible, was Noah running toward the store entrance. It's how I remember it, Maya said quietly. Not the scary parts. This part. When you asked me my name and told me I was safe, that's the part I want to remember. Ethan's throat was too tight to speak for a moment. He just nodded, taking in the details of the drawing, the care she'd put into every line. It's beautiful, he finally managed. I'm giving it to you, if you want it. Maya was studying his face, looking for his reaction. So you know that what you did mattered, that it changed things, that I'm still here because you didn't walk away. I want it, Ethan said. Thank you. That night, after they'd gone home and Noah was asleep and the house was quiet, Ethan sat in his living room staring at Maya's drawing. He'd hung it on the wall next to a photo of Sarah, these two moments that had defined his life in such different ways, the love he'd lost and the life he'd saved. The parallel wasn't lost on him. He hadn't been able to save Sarah. All his love, all his desperation, all his pleading with doctors and researching treatments and refusing to give up hope, none of it had mattered in the end. Cancer had taken her anyway, had reduced him to a helpless spectator watching the person he loved most disappear piece by piece. But in that parking lot, he'd been able to do something. He'd had agency, power, the ability to change an outcome through sheer force of will and stubborn refusal to let go. Maybe that was part of why he kept showing up for the Reynolds family. Because with them, he could help. He could make a difference. He could be something other than powerless. His phone buzzed. Another text from Rachel. Maya hasn't stopped smiling since you left. Whatever you said to her about the drawing, it meant everything. Thank you for seeing her, really seeing her." Ethan typed back, "Thank you for letting us be part of this, for trusting us with her. You're part of our family now. You know that, right? However this started, wherever it goes, you're family." The word hit differently than Ethan expected. Family. He and Noah had been a family of two for so long, their world shrunk down to just the space they occupied together. The idea of that circle expanding, of other people becoming integral to their daily existence, felt both terrifying and necessary. He thought about Sarah, about what she would say if she could see him now. She'd probably tease him about his hero complex, about his inability to walk past someone who needed help. But she'd also understand why he kept going back to the Reynolds house, why he'd committed himself to Maya's recovery without hesitation. Sarah had always believed that the best way to honor grief was to let it make you kinder, more present, more willing to show up for others. Maybe this was what that looked like. Not moving on from Sarah's death, but moving forward with the lessons she'd taught him about love and sacrifice and the importance of being there when it counted. Outside his window, winter was slowly, tentatively beginning its transformation into spring. The worst of the cold had passed. The days were getting incrementally longer, and somewhere across town, in a house he hadn't known existed 2 months ago, a teenage girl was sleeping more peacefully than she had in weeks, her recovery built on the foundation of consistency and care that Ethan and Noah had helped provide. It wasn't the life Ethan had planned. It wasn't the story he'd imagined writing after Sarah died. But sitting there in the quiet house, looking at Maya's drawing and thinking about the strange, necessary connections that had formed from violence and trauma, Ethan realized he wouldn't change it. Sometimes the most important moments of your life started in parking lots at dusk. Sometimes family was people you hadn't known existed until the day you ran toward their screams. And sometimes healing happened not in grand gestures, but in the steady accumulation of ordinary evenings spent together, building something new from the broken pieces of what came before. The trial was 6 weeks away. There would be hard days ahead, moments of backsliding and fear and doubt, but they would face those together, the strange assembled family of survivors and supporters, bound by the night when everything changed and the choice to keep showing up for each other afterward. Ethan looked at the drawing one more time before turning off the lights and heading to bed. In Maya's careful rendering of that moment in the parking lot, both their faces held the same expression, a mixture of fear and hope, trauma and resilience, the end of one story and the beginning of another. It was, he thought, the most honest thing anyone had ever created about who he really was and what he'd really done. Not a hero, just a person who'd made a choice and was still living with the consequences, good and complicated, finding his way forward one day at a time. March arrived with unexpected warmth, the kind of false spring that made everyone forget winter existed and then punished them with a surprise snowstorm 2 days later. But on this particular Tuesday evening, the temperature had climbed into the 60s, and Rachel had suggested they eat dinner on her back patio, a modest concrete square with mismatched chairs and a rusted grill that had seen better days. Ethan stood at that grill now, flipping burgers while Noah and Maya sat at the patio table, playing an elaborate game that seemed to involve both chess pieces and dinosaur figurines, the rules of which made sense only to them. Rachel was in the kitchen making a salad, visible through the sliding glass door, and Marcus had claimed he'd be down in 5 minutes, which in 19-year-old time meant anywhere from 10 minutes to never. "No, the Stegosaurus can't jump the night," Maya was saying with exaggerated patience. Stegosauruses were herbivores. They didn't hunt nights. "But this is a space Stegosaurus," Noah countered, using the same logic that had won him countless arguments. "And space Stegosauruses eat anything." "That's not how evolution works." "How do you know? You've never been to space." Maya laughed, and the sound carried across the patio like something precious. Ethan had learned to catalog her laughs over the past month, could distinguish between the polite laugh she used when she didn't want to seem rude, the nervous laugh that meant she was uncomfortable, and this one, the real one, unguarded and genuine. "Your son is impossible," Maya called over to Ethan, but her tone was affectionate. "Tell me about it. I've been dealing with his space dinosaur theories for years." Rachel emerged with the salad, setting it on the table, and then coming to stand beside Ethan at the grill. They'd fallen into this pattern, these casual moments of proximity that felt natural despite how little time they'd actually known each other. She handed him a beer, took one for herself, and they stood together watching the kids negotiate the rules of their bizarre game. "She's doing better," Rachel said quietly, for his ears only. "Her therapist says the progress in the last month has been remarkable. She's sleeping through most nights now. The panic attacks are less frequent." "That's good." "It's because of you. You know that, right?" Rachel took a sip of her beer. "Having you here, having this routine, this safety, it's made all the difference." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. He never knew how to respond when Rachel or Maya thanked him, when they attributed Maya's healing to his presence. It felt too heavy, too much like making him responsible for something he couldn't control. "It's not just me. It's the therapy, and you, and time, and you," Rachel interrupted firmly. "You can be uncomfortable with it if you want, but that doesn't make it less true. She trusts you. She feels safe around you. Those things matter." Before Ethan could formulate a response, Marcus finally appeared, sliding the glass door open and stepping onto the patio with his phone in hand. "Mom, your hospital called. They need someone to cover a shift tonight, 7 to 7. I told them you'd call back." Rachel's face fell. "Tonight? But I can handle things here," Marcus said. "It's fine. Or Noah and I could stay," Ethan heard himself offer. "Keep Maya company. Make sure she's okay, if that's all right with everyone." Rachel looked torn between professional obligation and maternal instinct. "I don't want to impose. You've already given up your Tuesday evening." "Rachel." Ethan waited until she looked at him. "We're here anyway. The burgers are almost done. We'll eat, clean up, probably watch a movie or something. It's not an imposition." Maya had been listening, and now she spoke up from the table. "I'd like that, if Ethan and Noah stay." That settled it. Rachel made the call, agreed to take the shift, and spent the next 20 minutes giving Marcus and Ethan approximately 47 instructions about where everything was, what to do if Maya had a panic attack, when she needed to take her medication, and who to call if anything went wrong. "Mom, we'll be fine," Maya said with teenager exasperation that somehow sounded more like her old self than anything Ethan had heard from her before. "Go save lives or whatever. We're just going to eat burgers and watch a movie." Rachel kissed her daughter's forehead, hugged Noah with surprising fierceness, and then surprised Ethan by hugging him too, quick and grateful. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Then she was gone, Marcus retreating to his room to study for midterms, and it was just Ethan, Noah, and Maya in the gathering dusk of the backyard. They ate dinner as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed too beautiful for the ordinary Tuesday it was. Noah talked non-stop about his upcoming field trip to the Science Museum, barely pausing to breathe between sentences. Maya listened with genuine interest, asking questions and sharing stories about her own field trips, back when school felt like an adventure instead of a battlefield. "Do you think you'll go back?" Ethan asked carefully. "To school?" Maya pushed lettuce around her plate, not meeting his eyes. "Mom wants me to try next week. Start slow, maybe just half days. My therapist thinks I'm ready." She paused. "I don't think I'm ready." "What would ready feel like?" "I don't know. Not like this. Not like I'm going to throw up every time I think about walking into that building." She finally looked up, her eyes searching his face. "How did you do it? After your wife died, how did you go back to normal life? How did you go to work and take care of Noah and act like the world hadn't ended?" Ethan set down his burger, the question hitting deeper than Maya probably realized. "Honestly, I didn't, not really. Not at first. I went through the motions. I showed up physically, but I wasn't really present. It took a long time before I felt like I was actually living again, instead of just surviving." "How long? A year, maybe? Longer? I'm not sure I'm even totally there yet." He saw the disappointment in her face and quickly added, "But Maya, what happened to you and what happened to me are different. Grief and trauma aren't the same thing. You're getting help, real help, and you're doing the work. That's huge." "It doesn't feel huge. It feels impossible." Noah had been listening quietly, and now he spoke up in that serious way he had sometimes, sounding far older than 6. My teacher says impossible just means nobody's figured out how yet, so you just have to figure out how. Maya smiled despite herself. Your teacher sounds pretty smart. She's okay. She gives too much homework, though. They cleaned up together, the three of them falling into an easy rhythm of clearing plates and loading the dishwasher. The house felt different with just them in it, more intimate somehow. Ethan was acutely aware that he was alone with Maya for the first time since the parking lot, that he was responsible for her well-being in a way that felt both natural and terrifying. Movie time? Noah asked hopefully, already heading for the living room. They settled on the couch, Noah between Ethan and Maya, and started an animated movie about dragons that Noah had apparently been dying to see. But 15 minutes in, Ethan noticed Maya wasn't watching. She was staring at nothing, her hands clenched in her lap, her breathing shallow and quick. Maya? He said softly. You okay? She shook her head, the motion jerky and panicked. Can't breathe right. This happens sometimes. I'm sorry, Hey, it's okay. Noah, buddy, can you pause the movie for a minute? Ethan kept his voice calm, level, the way Rachel had taught him during one of their many conversations about Maya's panic attacks. Maya, look at me. Can you look at me? She did, her eyes wide and frightened. Good. Now we're going to breathe together, okay? In for 4 counts. He demonstrated, breathing in slowly while counting. Hold for 4. Out for 4. Can you do that with me? Maya nodded and tried, her breath hitching and uneven at first. But Ethan kept going, counting steadily, breathing with her, and Noah, bless him, sat quietly between them, his small hand finding Maya's and holding on. It took maybe 5 minutes before Maya's breathing evened out, before the wild panic in her eyes receded into something more manageable. She slumped back against the couch, exhausted. I'm sorry, she whispered. I ruined movie night. You didn't ruin anything, Ethan said firmly. This happens. It's okay that it happens. Does it happen to you? Maya's question was tentative. The panic? The feeling like you can't breathe? Ethan hesitated, then decided honesty was more important than maintaining whatever image she had of him. Yeah, sometimes. Usually at night when I can't sleep and my brain decides to remind me of everything I've lost or everything that could still go wrong. It's not as frequent as what you're dealing with, but yeah, I know what it feels like. What do you do when it happens? Breathe like we just did. Sometimes I text your mom, actually, or I get up and check on Noah, remind myself he's safe and okay. Sometimes I just wait it out. He paused. There's no magic solution. You just learn to ride it out and trust that it'll pass eventually. Maya was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Then she said, Thank you for not pretending you're fine all the time. Everyone else does that. They act like they've got everything figured out, like they're never scared or sad or messed up. It makes me feel even more broken. You're not broken, Ethan said. You're healing. Those are different things. They eventually restarted the movie, but Ethan found himself only half watching, too aware of Maya beside them, of the fragility of this moment, of the trust she was placing in him. When Noah fell asleep halfway through, his head heavy on Ethan's lap, Maya shifted slightly closer. Can I tell you something? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Something I haven't told anyone else? Of course. Sometimes I'm angry at you. The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them in for too long. Not all the time, and not in a way that makes sense, but sometimes I look at you and I'm just furious. Because you saved me, and that should make me purely grateful, but instead I'm angry that I needed saving. Angry that I was weak enough to need someone to rescue me. Angry that my life is now defined by this thing that happened and your part in it. Ethan felt the weight of her confession settle over him. He'd suspected something like this, had seen flashes of it in the way she sometimes looked at him. Not with gratitude, but with something more complicated and painful. That makes sense, he said carefully. It does? Yeah. You didn't ask for any of this. You didn't ask to be attacked, and you didn't ask for me to show up and turn that night into this whole thing that everyone wants to talk about and celebrate. I'm a walking reminder of the worst thing that ever happened to you. Of course you're angry sometimes. Maya's eyes were full of tears. But I'm also grateful. I know I am. And that makes me feel guilty for being angry. And then I'm angry about feeling guilty. And it's just this whole mess of feelings that I don't know what to do with. Feelings don't have to make sense, Ethan said. You can be angry and grateful at the same time. You can hate what happened and be glad you survived. You can resent me and still want me around. All of that can be true simultaneously. My therapist says that too. Your therapist is smart, Maya laughed wetly, wiping at her eyes. She also says I need to stop making you into some kind of perfect hero figure, that it's not fair to either of us. She's definitely right about that. Ethan adjusted his position slightly, careful not to wake Noah. I'm just a person, Maya. A pretty flawed person who happened to be in the right place at the right time. That's it. I'm not brave or noble or any of the things people keep saying. I'm just a tired single dad trying to figure out life one day at a time. That's what makes it matter, though, Maya said quietly. If you were some kind of fearless hero type, it would be different. But you're just regular. And you still ran toward danger. You still chose to help even though you were scared. That means something. They sat in silence for a while, the movie playing unwatched, Noah's soft snoring the only sound besides their breathing. Outside, night had fully fallen, and the house felt like a small island of light and safety in the darkness. I've been writing things down, Maya said eventually. Memories from before. Good things, from when I wasn't scared all the time. My therapist suggested it to help me remember that I'm more than what happened. Does it help? Sometimes. Mostly it just makes me sad for who I used to be. She picked at a loose thread on the couch cushion. There's this girl in my memories, confident, happy, fearless. And I don't know if I'll ever get back to being her. Maybe you won't, Ethan said, and saw Maya's face fall before he could continue. But maybe that's okay. Maybe you become someone new instead. Someone who's been through hell and came out the other side. Someone who knows what fear feels like and chooses to keep going anyway. That person might be even better than who you were before. You really believe that? Ethan thought about Sarah's death, about the person he'd been before cancer had torn through their lives like a hurricane. That Ethan had been more carefree, more optimistic, less aware of how quickly everything could disappear. He'd lost that version of himself and mourned it for a long time. But the person he'd become, scarred and cautious and deeply aware of how precious every ordinary moment was, that person had run toward a stranger's screams in a parking lot. That person had become someone Maya could lean on. Yeah, he said. I really believe that. Rachel came home close to midnight, exhausted from her shift but smiling when she found them all asleep on the couch. Noah sprawled across Ethan's lap. Maya curled into the corner with pancake on her stomach, Ethan's head tipped back against the cushions. She took a photo with her phone, unable to resist, and then gently woke Ethan. Hey, she whispered. How'd it go? Ethan carefully extracted himself from under Noah, his legs numb from being in one position too long. Good. She had a panic attack earlier, but talked through it. We watched a movie, talked. It was good. Rachel glanced at her sleeping daughter, her expression soft with love and worry and gratitude all mixed together. She told you about being angry, didn't she? I can always tell when she's unburdened herself. She looks more peaceful. Yeah, she told me. And you didn't run screaming? Rachel smiled slightly. That's more than some people could handle. Being told that your presence is both healing and painful. I get it, though. I'd probably feel the same way in her position. They stood together in the quiet living room, two single parents who'd been thrown together by violence and had somehow built something gentle from it. Ethan was increasingly aware of Rachel in moments like this, the way she pushed her hair back when she was tired, the worry lines between her eyebrows that never quite disappeared, the strength it took for her to keep getting up day after day and fighting for her daughter's recovery. Thank you for staying, Rachel said, for being someone she can talk to, for just being here. Where else would I be? The question was simple, but it carried weight. Where else would he be except here with these people who'd become essential to his life in ways he couldn't quite articulate? Certainly not at home alone with Noah. Their world still shrunk down to just the two of them. This was better. Messier and more complicated, but better. Ethan gathered the still sleeping Noah into his arms. His son was getting too big for this, all gangly limbs and solid weight, and headed for the door. Rachel walked them out, standing on the porch as they made their way to the car. "The trial's in 3 weeks," she called softly. "Maya told the prosecutor today she'll testify. She said if you're there, she can do it." The responsibility of that statement hit Ethan in the chest. Maya's courage, her willingness to face her attacker, hinged on his presence. It should have felt like too much pressure, should have made him want to retreat from this entanglement before it consumed him completely. Instead, he just called back, "I'll be there, promise." The next 3 weeks moved with the strange quality of time before a significant event, simultaneously crawling and racing, each day feeling both endless and too short. The dinner routine continued, the families weaving themselves together in ways that started to feel permanent. Marcus began joining them more often, opening up about his fears regarding college and money and the future. Rachel had a day off and came to Noah's school play, sitting next to Ethan in the cramped auditorium and laughing at all the places where 6-year-olds forgot their lines or wandered off stage in confusion. Maya had good days and bad days, but the ratio was slowly shifting in favor of the good. She went back to school for half days and survived them. She started talking about maybe, possibly, eventually trying out for volleyball again. She smiled more. The constant vigilance in her eyes began to ease just slightly. And through it all, Ethan found himself thinking less about what he'd lost and more about what he was building. Sarah would always be part of him, her absence a permanent ache. But the Reynolds family, chaotic and wounded and fighting their way toward wholeness, they were filling spaces Ethan hadn't realized were empty. The night before the trial, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about walking into that courtroom, about seeing Zachary Hendricks again, about watching Maya have to relive the worst night of her life in front of strangers. He thought about the weight of her trust, the responsibility of being someone's safe person. Around 2 a.m., his phone buzzed, a text from Maya. "Are you awake?" "Yeah, can't sleep." "Me neither, I'm terrified." "I know, that's okay. Being terrified doesn't mean you're not brave." A long pause, then, "Will you really be there tomorrow? You promise?" "I promise. Front row, the whole time." "Okay. I can do this if you're there." "You can do this either way, but I'll be there." Another pause, longer this time, then simply, "Thank you for not walking away that night. Thank you for not walking away all the nights after." Ethan stared at the message, his throat tight with emotions he couldn't name. He thought about typing something profound, something that would capture the complexity of what they'd all been through and how it had changed him. Instead, he just wrote back, "Thank you for letting me stay." The courthouse was an imposing building of gray stone and tall windows, designed to make people feel small and intimidated. Ethan sat in the hallway outside the courtroom with Rachel, both of them silent with tension, waiting for Maya to arrive with the victim's advocate who'd been helping her prepare for this day. When she finally appeared, Maya looked impossibly young in her conservative dress and nervous expression. Her eyes found Ethan immediately, and he saw her shoulders drop slightly, some of the tension releasing. "You came," she said, like there'd been any doubt. "Told you I would." They walked into the courtroom together, Ethan and Rachel on either side of Maya until she had to separate and go sit with the prosecutor. Ethan took his seat in the front row of the gallery, exactly where he'd promised to be, and prepared himself for whatever came next. When Zachary Hendricks was led in, shackled and wearing an orange jumpsuit, Ethan felt his hands clench into fists. The man looked smaller than he remembered, more ordinary, just another person who'd made monstrous choices. Their eyes met for a brief second, and Ethan saw recognition there, and something that might have been fear. Good. Let him be afraid for once. The trial proceedings were technical and tedious, full of legal language and procedural delays, but when Maya finally took the stand, the room seemed to hold its breath. She was sworn in, sat down, and immediately her eyes found Ethan's. He nodded once, trying to communicate everything he couldn't say out loud. "You've got this. I'm here. You're safe." The prosecutor began her questions, gentle but thorough. Maya's voice shook at first, barely audible, but gradually grew stronger. She described the attack in clinical detail, where she'd been, what had happened, how Hendricks had grabbed her and forced her toward the vehicle. She described her fear, her desperate attempts to fight back,
her certainty that she was about to disappear forever. And then she described Ethan's arrival, the relief of not being alone anymore, the hope that someone had seen and someone had cared enough to help. Her voice broke there, tears streaming down her face, but she kept going. The defense attorney's cross-examination was brutal, trying to poke holes in her memory, to suggest she'd misunderstood Hendrik's intentions, to imply that she was simply a confused teenager who'd blown things out of proportion. Maya's hand shook. Her voice wavered, but every time she faltered, her eyes would find Ethan's, and she'd take a breath and continue. She was magnificent, terrified and traumatized, and absolutely magnificent. When it was finally over, when Maya was released from the stand and could collapse into her mother's arms in the hallway, Ethan felt something release in his own chest. She'd done it. She'd faced her attacker and told her truth, and refused to let fear silence her. "I couldn't have done that without you," Maya said when she finally pulled away from Rachel, her face blotchy and tear-stained. "I kept looking at you and remembering that if you could run toward danger to save me, I could sit in a chair and tell the truth." "You were incredible," Ethan said, meaning it absolutely. "Brave and clear and strong. Your mom should be so proud." "I am," Rachel said, her own tears flowing freely now. "Baby, I am so proud of you." The verdict came 2 days later. Guilty on all counts. Zachary Hendricks would spend the rest of his life in prison, would never have the opportunity to hurt another girl the way he'd hurt Maya and those 3 others. When Rachel called to tell him, Ethan could hear the relief in her voice, the sense that maybe, finally, they could all start to truly move forward. That night, both families gathered at the Reynolds house for what Rachel had declared a celebration dinner, though it felt more like a collective exhale after weeks of held breath. Marcus ordered pizza. Noah and Maya played with pancake, and Ethan found himself on the back patio with Rachel, both of them holding beers and watching the spring evening fade into dusk. "It's over," Rachel said wonderingly. "The trial, the waiting, the not knowing. It's actually over." "How's Maya handling it?" "Better than I expected. Happy, but also kind of deflated. Like she'd been holding herself together for this moment, and now she doesn't know what to do with herself." Rachel turned to look at him. She said she wants to start sleeping without the nightlight. Said that if she was brave enough to testify, she's brave enough to sleep in the dark. "That's huge." "Yeah." Rachel smiled, but it was watery with emotion. "I keep waiting for things to go back to normal, but I'm realizing there is no back. There's only forward, a different version of normal that includes everything that happened and everything we've all become because of it." "That's not a bad thing, though," Ethan said. "Different doesn't mean worse." "No," Rachel agreed, and she was looking at him in a way that made Ethan's heart beat faster. "Sometimes different means better. Better than you ever could have imagined when you were living in the before." They stood there in the gathering darkness, 2 people who'd been thrown together by violence and trauma and had built something solid from those broken foundations. Inside they could hear laughter, Noah's high-pitched giggle and Maya's lower chuckle, Marcus saying something that made both kids groan in exaggerated annoyance. The sounds of a family, however unconventional its formation. Ethan thought about the man he'd been 3 months ago, walking through that grocery store parking lot with his son's hand in his life small and contained and survivable. That man had made a choice in a split second, had run toward danger without knowing where it would lead. And it had led here, to this patio, this family, this sense of purpose and connection that had been missing since Sarah died. Not a replacement for what he'd lost. Nothing could ever replace Sarah. But something new and valuable in its own right. "Thank you," he said to Rachel, the words inadequate but necessary. "For what?" "For trusting me with your daughter, with your family, for letting us be part of this." Rachel reached out and took his hand, the gesture simple but weighted with meaning. "Thank you for showing up, for keeping your promises, for being exactly what we needed when we needed it most." Inside, Noah called for his dad, something about needing help with a pizza grease emergency. Rachel laughed and released Ethan's hand, and they went back inside together, back to the noise and mess and beautiful ordinary chaos of their joined lives. The healing wasn't finished. There would be more hard days, more setbacks, more moments when fear won out over progress. But they would face those together,
this assembled family of survivors and supporters, building their future one small moment at a time. And that, Ethan thought as he helped Noah clean pizza sauce off Pancake's head, was more than enough. Summer arrived in a rush of green and gold, the kind of weather that made you forget winter had ever existed. Ethan stood in his backyard on a Saturday morning in late June, watching Noah chase Maya around with a water gun while Marcus manned the grill with the serious concentration of someone who'd appointed himself the family's official barbecue master. Rachel sat on the patio steps beside Ethan, her bare feet in the grass, her face tilted toward the sun. "I can't believe it's been 6 months," she said, not for the first time. 6 months had become a marker they all referenced, a way of measuring the distance they'd traveled from that night in the parking lot. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Other times it feels like a whole lifetime ago. "Both things can be true," Ethan said, echoing words he'd spoken so many times to Maya they'd become something like a mantra for all of them. The backyard had become their gathering place over the past few months, alternating between Ethan's house and Rachel's depending on whose turn it was to host. What had started as occasional dinners had evolved into standing Saturday plans, then Sunday morning breakfasts, then weeknight homework sessions where Maya helped Noah with reading while Ethan and Rachel cooked and pretended they weren't building something that looked suspiciously like a life together. No one had named it yet. No one had sat down and had the conversation about what they were to each other, what this arrangement meant for the future. They'd all been too busy living it, too focused on the day-to-day work of healing and growing and figuring out how to be this strange assembled family unit. But lately, Ethan had started feeling the weight of the unspoken, the questions that hovered in the air during quiet moments. What were they doing? Where was this going? And most pressingly, what happened when the shared trauma that had brought them together faded into the background, and they had to figure out if what they'd built could stand on its own? "She's going back to volleyball on Monday," Rachel said, watching her daughter shriek with laughter as Noah finally landed a direct hit with his water gun. "Full practice schedule, not just the conditioning stuff she's been doing. Coach says if she keeps it up, she'll be starting varsity as a sophomore this fall." "That's huge. How's she feeling about it?" "Terrified, excited, convinced she'll be terrible and everyone will hate her," Rachel smiled. "So, normal teenager stuff instead of trauma stuff. I'll take it." It was true that Maya had transformed over these months, shedding layers of fear like a snake shedding skin. She still had hard days, had woken up screaming from nightmares just 2 weeks ago, had a panic attack at the grocery store when she saw a black SUV in the parking lot. But the bad days were outnumbered by the good ones now, and she was starting to talk about her future again with something that sounded like hope instead of resignation. She'd also, Ethan had noticed, started calling him by a nickname. Not Dad. She had a father, an absent one who'd sent a cursory text after the trial, but hadn't bothered to visit. But E, casual and affectionate in a way that made Ethan's chest tight every time he heard it. Noah had picked it up too, and now both kids called him E like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Noah asked me something yesterday," Ethan said, watching his son reload his water gun with the focused determination of a 6-year-old on a mission. Asked if Maya was going to be his sister someday. Rachel went very still beside him. "What did you tell him?" "I said I didn't know. That these things were complicated and we were all just trying to figure it out as we went." Ethan paused, gathering his courage for what he needed to say next. "But Rachel, we should probably talk about what this is, what we're doing, because the kids are noticing and they're starting to make assumptions, and I don't want to mess this up." "What do you think we're doing?" Rachel's voice was careful, neutral, giving nothing away. Ethan thought about how to answer that. He could play it safe, keep things vague and undefined, maintain the status quo that had worked so well for the past 6 months. Or he could be honest, could voice the thing that had been growing in his chest since that first coffee shop meeting, maybe even since the moment he'd seen Rachel's face when she first looked at him with desperate gratitude for saving her daughter. "I think we're building something," he said finally. "Something that started because of trauma, but became something else. Something I don't want to lose." Rachel was quiet for a long moment, her eyes on her daughter. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "I'm scared. I'm so scared of messing this up. Maya's doing so well and Noah's happy, and what if we try to make this into something romantic?
and it ruins everything. What if we lose what we have? What if we don't? Ethan countered gently. What if it makes it better? Or what if I'm just trauma bonded to you? What if I'm confusing gratitude with something deeper, and we wake up in 6 months realizing we made a terrible mistake? Rachel finally looked at him, and her eyes were full of fear and longing in equal measure. I can't lose you, Ethan, any of you. You've become so essential to our healing, to Maya's recovery. The risk of losing that is, I know. Ethan did know, felt the same fear twisting in his own gut.
But Rachel, I need you to understand something. When I look at you, I don't see the mother of the girl I saved. I see someone who makes me laugh, who understands what it's like to be solely responsible for keeping a small human alive, who doesn't need me to be a hero because she's too busy being one herself. He took a breath. I see someone I want to build a future with, if she'll let me. Rachel's hand found his, their fingers interlacing in the grass between them. I'm falling in love with you, she whispered. I've been trying not to, trying to convince myself it's just gratitude or trauma or convenience, but it's not. It's real and it's terrifying, and I don't know what to do with it. Fall, Ethan said simply. Just fall. I'll catch you. Promise? I ran into traffic for your daughter. I sat through a trial where I had to face the man who tried to take her. I've shown up every week for 6 months without fail. Ethan squeezed her hand. I'm not going anywhere, Rachel. Not unless you tell me to. Before Rachel could respond, Noah came running over, soaking wet and grinning. Dad, can Maya sleep over tonight? We want to build a blanket fort and watch movies, and Marcus said he'd make popcorn. Ethan looked at Rachel, saw her trying not to smile. That okay with Maya's mom? Only if you all stay, Rachel said, the words carrying weight beyond a simple sleepover invitation. Only if we do this together, all of us. That night, after the kids had indeed built an elaborate blanket fort in Ethan's living room, and Marcus had made enough popcorn to feed a small army, after the movie had ended, and Noah and Maya had finally fallen asleep tangled together in the fort like puppies, Ethan and Rachel sat on the couch while Marcus dozed in the armchair. This is what it could be like, Rachel said softly, gesturing to the scene around them, if we're brave enough to try. I'm tired of being brave, Ethan admitted. I just want to be happy. Is that allowed? I think so. I think maybe that's the whole point. Rachel leaned her head on his shoulder, and Ethan wrapped his arm around her, and they sat there in the quiet house listening to the kids breathe and Marcus's soft snoring. It wasn't perfect. The blanket fort was already collapsing on one side. There were popcorn kernels ground into the carpet. Marcus was going to wake up with a terrible crick in his neck from sleeping in that position. But it was real and warm and full of the kind of love that came from choosing each other day after day, moment after moment. The official conversation happened 2 weeks later, on a Wednesday evening when the kids were at Noah's school carnival and Marcus was at work. Ethan and Rachel sat at her kitchen table with coffee growing cold between them, finally naming what they'd been building. I want to try this, Rachel said. Really try. Not just as friends or co-parents or trauma survivors supporting each other, but as partners, as people building a life together. So do I. But we have to be smart about it. The kids come first always. We move slowly. We don't make promises we can't keep. Rachel's nurse training was showing, the need to assess and plan and prepare for every contingency. And we need to talk to them, make sure they're okay with this changing. Maya already knows, Ethan said. She told me last week that she was glad her mom had found someone good, someone who made her smile again. Noah told me yesterday that he wishes you'd marry my mom so we could all live together and he could have a sister. Rachel laughed despite herself. Apparently they've been planning this behind our backs. Smart kids. Terrifying kids. But Rachel was smiling, and when she reached across the table for Ethan's hand, he took it without hesitation. They told the kids officially that weekend, sitting them all down with the kind of serious energy that immediately made everyone nervous. Maya's eyes were wide. Noah was bouncing in his seat, and Marcus looked like he was trying not to laugh at the whole production. So, Ethan began, then realized he had no idea how to phrase this. Your mom and I have been talking, and we wanted you all to know that we're going to try being more than friends. Dating, I guess, though that seems like a weird word at our age. Finally, Maya said, throwing up her hands in exaggerated relief. We've been waiting forever for you two to figure it out. You knew? Rachel asked, startled. Mom, everyone knew. You look at him like he hung the moon, and he looks at you like you're the best thing he's ever seen. Maya's voice was matter of fact. We were starting to wonder if you'd ever actually do something about it. Noah was less subtle. Does this mean Maya's going to be my sister? Not immediately, Ethan said carefully. We're going to take things slow, make sure this works for everyone. But eventually, maybe, if that's something you'd want. I want it, Noah said, with the absolute certainty only a 6-year-old could muster. Maya's the best, and her mom makes you smile like you used to when Mom was alive. The words hit Ethan harder than he'd expected, this reminder that Noah remembered the before times, remembered Sarah and the happiness they'd shared. For so long, Ethan had worried that moving forward meant betraying Sarah's memory, that finding happiness again somehow diminished what they'd had. But looking at Noah's face now, he understood that his son didn't see it that way. Noah just saw his dad smiling again, laughing again, living again instead of just surviving. And Sarah, wherever she was, would have wanted that too. She'd made him promise during those final terrible days that he wouldn't let grief consume him, that he'd find joy again when he was ready. Maybe he was finally ready. Marcus spoke up for the first time, his voice dry but warm. Just so we're clear, I'm not calling you Dad. Ethan's fine. Or E, since apparently that's what we're doing now. Ethan's perfect, Ethan assured him, grateful for the kid's ability to cut through tension with humor. The transition from friends to something more was surprisingly easy, or maybe it was only easy because they'd already been living like a family for months. They went on actual dates now, just the two of them, leaving the kids with Marcus or a babysitter. They held hands in public. They kissed goodnight on doorsteps like teenagers, both of them grinning at the absurdity and rightness of it. But the real relationship, the one that mattered most, continued to be the family dinners and movie nights, the homework sessions and soccer games, the ordinary everyday moments of building a life together. Maya thrived with the stability of it. Her nightmares became less frequent, then rare, then almost non-existent. She made varsity volleyball as a sophomore, just like her coach had predicted, and Ethan sat in the stands beside Rachel at every home game, cheering until his voice was hoarse. She started talking about colleges, about future plans, about dreams she'd thought were lost forever. One evening in September, almost a full year after the parking lot, Maya came to Ethan's house alone. Noah was at a friend's birthday party, and Rachel was working a double shift at the hospital. Marcus had dropped Maya off with instructions to talk to E about the thing, which gave Ethan approximately zero context for what was coming. They sat in the backyard as the sun set, and Maya pulled out a folder from her bag. I want to show you something, but you have to promise not to make a big deal about it. I promised to try not to make a big deal about it, Ethan amended, knowing that if Maya was nervous about showing him something, it was probably significant. She handed him the folder, and inside he found a college application essay. The prompt at the top asked students to discuss a moment that changed their life and how they'd grown from it. Maya's essay was titled "The Man Who Ran Toward Danger." Ethan read it slowly, his throat getting tighter with each paragraph. She wrote about the attack, but not in the clinical way she'd described it in court. This was personal, raw, honest. She wrote about her fear, her certainty that she was about to die, the desperate hope when she heard someone running toward her. She wrote about the aftermath, about learning to live with trauma, about the long road of therapy and setbacks and tiny victories. But mostly, she wrote about what it meant to be saved not just once, in a parking lot, but over and over again in the months that followed. About learning what real courage looked like from someone who admitted to being scared. About understanding that healing required showing up consistently. That love was a verb more than a feeling. About finding family in unexpected places and learning to trust again when trust had been shattered. It's beautiful, Ethan managed when he finished, his voice rough. Maya, this is incredibly powerful. I wanted to write about something real, something that mattered, and this is the thing that matters most. She pulled her knees to her chest, a gesture he recognized from months ago when she'd been drowning in fear and panic. Now it just looked contemplative. You gave me my life back, E. Not just by stopping Hendrix, but by sticking around after. By making safety feel real instead of just theoretical. You did the hard work, Ethan said. I just showed up. That's exactly it, though. You just showed up. Over and over, when you didn't have to. When there was nothing in it for you except making sure a messed up teenager and her exhausted mom were okay. Maya smiled, and it reached her eyes in a way it hadn't for months after the attack. That's what love looks like, right? Just showing up. Yeah, Ethan agreed. That's exactly what it looks like. Maya left before Rachel got home from her shift, but she hugged Ethan tight before she went, whispering thank you one more time like she needed him to know, really know, what his presence in her life meant. When Rachel arrived an hour later, exhausted from a brutal double shift, Ethan was still sitting in the backyard thinking about Maya's essay, about the year they'd all lived through, about how violence had brought them together, but love had made them stay. Bad shift? He asked as Rachel collapsed into the chair beside him. Long shift. Lost a patient, which is always hard. She closed her eyes, her face drawn with exhaustion. Young guy, motorcycle accident. His family was there at the end, but it doesn't make it easier. Ethan reached for her hand, held it silently. This was something else they'd learned over the past year, that sometimes comfort wasn't about fixing things or offering platitudes. Sometimes it was just about being present for the hard moments, bearing witness to pain without trying to make it disappear. Maya showed me her college essay today, he said after a while. She wrote about the parking lot, about everything after. She read it to me last week. I cried for an hour. Rachel opened her eyes, looking at him with an intensity that still sometimes took his breath away. She's going to be okay, you know, really okay. Not just surviving okay, but thriving okay. I know, you all are. So are you, Rachel said softly. You know that, right? You've healed too over this year. I've watched you come back to life, bit by bit. Ethan thought about that. About the man he'd been a year ago walking through a parking lot with his world reduced to the size of his grief. About how running toward a stranger's screams had somehow led to this. A partner who understood him, kids who made him laugh, a family assembled from broken pieces that had somehow formed something whole. I think maybe we healed each other, he said. Yeah, Rachel agreed. I think maybe we did. By the time December arrived, a full year after that night in the parking lot, the question of marriage had started hovering in the air, unspoken. The kids brought it up constantly, Noah with his usual lack of subtlety, and Maya with more carefully worded hints. Marcus made jokes about it. Rachel's co-workers at the hospital asked when they were planning to make it official. But Ethan wanted to do it right, wanted it to be meaningful rather than just checking a box. He waited until the anniversary of the parking lot incident, a date that held weight for all of them, and then he proposed not in some grand public gesture, but in Rachel's backyard with all the kids present, because they were part of this too. This year's been the hardest and best year of my life, he said, kneeling in the cold December grass while Noah bounced excitedly, and Maya had her hands pressed over her mouth. We've built something beautiful from something terrible, and I don't want to waste another day not being officially, legally, completely a family. Rachel was crying before he even got the ring out, nodding before he could finish the question. Yes, yes, obviously yes. They got married 3 months later in Rachel's backyard with just family and a handful of close friends. Maya was maid of honor, Noah was ring bearer, and Marcus walked his mother down the makeshift aisle with the kind of fierce pride that made half the guests cry. It was small and simple and perfect, the kind of ceremony that focused on what mattered. These people, this commitment, this choice to keep choosing each other day after day. During the reception, such as it was, pizza from Noah's favorite place, and a cake from the grocery store bakery, Detective Martinez stopped by to offer her congratulations. She'd become something of an informal part of their lives over the past year, checking in occasionally to see how Maya was doing, how the family was adjusting. You know, she said to Ethan as they watched the kids play in the yard, I've been doing this job for 20 years. I've seen a lot of victims and a lot of heroes, but I've never seen anything quite like what you all built here. Most people, they save someone and move on with their lives. They don't stick around for the hard part. The hard part was the important part, Ethan said. That's what makes you different. Detective Martinez smiled. That's what makes this whole thing so remarkable. You understood that the rescue didn't end in the parking lot. It continued every day after. She was right, Ethan thought. The rescue hadn't ended in violence. It had continued in hospital rooms and coffee shops, in therapy sessions and courtrooms, in dinner conversations and movie nights. It had continued in every moment when fear threatened to win and they'd chosen courage instead. Every time Maya woke from a nightmare and found people who loved her waiting. Every time Rachel doubted herself and found Ethan there to remind her of her strength. Every time Noah asked questions about death and loss and found answers that made the world feel safe again. That night, after the guests had left and the kids were asleep in various bedrooms throughout the house, Ethan and Rachel stood together in the backyard looking at the stars. They were married now, officially one family, but it didn't feel different from what they'd been building all along. It just felt like the natural progression of a journey that had started in violence and trauma, but had become something gentler, something chosen and deliberate and full of love. "What are you thinking about?" Rachel asked, leaning into his side. "I'm thinking about that night," Ethan admitted. "About the 3 seconds I had to decide whether to run toward danger or walk away. About how that one choice led to this. Do you ever regret it? The choice, I mean? The cost?" Rachel's question was careful, acknowledging that Ethan's intervention had come with trauma of its own, nightmares and fear and the weight of responsibility. "No," Ethan said, surprising himself with how absolutely he meant it. "Not for a second, because, yes, it was hard and scary, and I still sometimes wake up at 3 a.m. remembering how close I came to never seeing Noah grow up. But I also wake up next to you. I get to watch Maya thrive instead of wondering what happened to the girl I couldn't save. I get to have this, all of this, instead of living the rest of my life knowing I chose safety over someone's survival." "You gave us our lives back," Rachel said. "All of us. Not just Maya. You gave me mine back too." Ethan turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I was so lost after Sarah died. Just going through the motions, trying to be enough for Noah, but feeling like I was failing every day. And then that night happened, and you happened, and suddenly I had a reason to show up fully again. You reminded me that life was still worth living, even after loss." They stood there in the quiet darkness, two people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and built something impossibly beautiful anyway. Inside the house, 4 kids slept peacefully, Noah and Maya having claimed the blanket fort they'd reconstructed for the wedding, Marcus in his usual room. 4 kids who'd become siblings, not through biology, but through choice and circumstance and the daily work of loving each other. "What do you think happens now?" Rachel asked. "I mean, we've been building toward this for so long. The trial, the healing, the wedding. What comes after?" "Life," Ethan said simply. "Just regular, ordinary, beautiful life. Good days and bad days, successes and failures, all the normal things that happen when you're just a family trying to figure things out." "That sounds perfect." "It does, doesn't it?" The years that followed proved Ethan right. Life became delightfully, wonderfully ordinary in the best possible way. Maya graduated high school with honors and a full scholarship to college for volleyball. Noah grew taller and louder and developed an obsession with marine biology that replaced his dinosaur phase. Marcus finished his engineering degree and got a job that let him move out but still come for family dinners every Sunday. There were hard moments too. Maya had occasional setbacks, particularly around the anniversary of the attack or when something triggered an unexpected memory. Rachel's job brought home pain and loss that sometimes felt overwhelming. Ethan and Rachel had their share of arguments and disagreements, learning how to merge their different parenting styles and household routines. Noah struggled with moments of grief about Sarah, about the mother he was slowly forgetting. But they faced all of it together, this family assembled from trauma and choice. They learned that healing wasn't linear, that love was sometimes easy and sometimes hard work, that family meant showing up even when you didn't know what to say or do. On the 5-year anniversary of the parking lot incident, they gathered in Ethan and Rachel's backyard. They'd sold both their old houses and bought one together, a place big enough for their assembled family, for what had become their annual tradition. It wasn't a celebration exactly, more of an acknowledgement, a moment to remember how far they'd all come. Maya stood up to make a toast, now 20 years old and confident in ways that 17-year-old Maya could never have imagined. 5 years ago tonight, my life should have ended. Instead, It was saved by a man who ran toward danger without knowing if he'd survive it. And then, when the immediate danger passed, he did something even harder. He kept showing up. He taught me what real courage looks like, what real love looks like, what family means when it's built on choice rather than obligation. She raised her glass, her eyes bright with tears that weren't sad. To Ethan Cole, who gave me back my future. And to all of us, for building something beautiful from something terrible. For proving that the worst moment of your life doesn't have to define the rest of it. They all raised their glasses. Ethan and Rachel, Noah, now 11 and already almost as tall as his father, Marcus home from his new job for the weekend, and Maya herself, this fierce young woman who bore the scars of trauma but refused to be limited by them. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Ethan found himself standing in the same spot in the backyard where he'd stood so many times over the past 5 years. Rachel joined him, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, the question familiar now, part of their nightly ritual. "I'm thinking about how one moment changed everything," Ethan said. "How 3 seconds of decision in a parking lot led to this entire life. How the best thing I ever did was run toward a stranger's scream. The best thing you ever did was keep running toward us after the immediate danger passed," Rachel corrected gently. "Lots of people would have saved Maya that night. But only you stayed. Only you understood that rescue is a continuous choice, not a single action." She was right, Ethan knew. The parking lot had been the easy part, adrenaline and instinct overriding fear. The real heroism had come in the weeks and months and years that followed, in choosing to stay when it was hard, to show up when he was tired, to love when love required work and patience and faith. "I didn't save Maya," he said, the realization crystallizing into words. "We all saved each other. She gave me purpose when I was lost in grief. You gave me partnership when I'd given up on ever finding that again. Noah gave me permission to be happy without forgetting his mother. Even Marcus, with his dry humor and steady presence, he saved me from taking everything too seriously." "So what does that make us?" Rachel asked. "A family of mutual rescuers?" "I think that's just what family is," Ethan said. "People who save each other, over and over, in 1,000 small ways, who choose to stay and build and love even when it's hard, who turn single moments of courage into lifetimes of commitment." They stood there in the darkness of their backyard, in the house they'd chosen together, surrounded by the sleeping forms of the family they'd built from broken pieces. And Ethan understood, finally and completely, what the parking lot had really been about. It hadn't been about being a hero. It hadn't been about proving something or living up to some ideal. It had simply been about seeing someone who needed help and refusing to walk away, then making that same choice every day afterward. Refusing to walk away when Maya had nightmares, when Rachel doubted herself, when Noah grieved, when life got complicated and messy and difficult. The courage wasn't in the running toward danger. The courage was in the staying after the danger passed, in the showing up day after day, in the building of something new from the wreckage of trauma and loss. Standing in his backyard 5 years later, Ethan Cole understood that he hadn't just saved a stranger's daughter that winter night. He'd found his way back to life, had discovered that the heart he thought had died with Sarah still had room to grow and love and embrace the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of an assembled family. The parking lot had been the beginning. But this quiet moment in the darkness with his wife beside him and their children sleeping safely inside, this was what he'd really been running toward all along. Not just rescue, but recovery. Not just survival, but the kind of deep, transformative healing that only comes from choosing love over fear, presence over absence, connection over isolation. One moment of courage hadn't just stopped a tragedy. It had created a family, had built a future from the wreckage of trauma, had proven that the worst things that happen to us don't have to define us. They can, if we're brave enough, become the foundation for something better than we ever imagined possible. And as Ethan turned to kiss his wife and head inside to check on their sleeping children one last time before bed, he realized that this was enough. More than enough. This ordinary, extraordinary life they'd built together. It was everything he'd never known he needed, the family he'd never expected to find, the future he'd earned by refusing to walk away when someone needed him most. The story that started in violence had become one about love. The rescue that began in a parking lot continued every single day in 1,000 small choices to show up, to care, to stay. And that, Ethan understood as he climbed into bed beside Rachel and let the peace of an ordinary night wash over him, was the truest kind of heroism there was. Not the dramatic gesture, but the daily commitment. Not the single moment of bravery, but the lifetime of showing up. Not just saving a life, but helping that life, and his own, become worth living again. Outside, the winter stars shone down on their house, on this family that had found each other in darkness and built something luminous together. And inside, 5 people who'd been broken in different ways slept peacefully, held together by bonds forged in trauma, but strengthened by choice, by patience, by the simple revolutionary act of refusing to let the worst moment define the rest of the story. This was their ending. This was their beginning. This was their life, imperfect and precious and entirely their own.